at the Bank of England. And, Liam, of course, we were suggesting that maybe they will have to go for an increase, perhaps even 0.5%, because they've got, a remit to get a grips on inflation.
Indeed, Mark. Just a year ago, interest rates were down well below 1%, but now they're up at 3.5%. We've seen 9 successive rate rises during 2022 as inflation has surged up to a 40-year high, and the Bank of England has moved belatedly, in my view, I'm afraid to say, to push down on inflation by raising interest rates. That, of course, is good news for savers, but it means borrowers, particularly those with mortgages, will pay more. We're at 3.5% now, Mark. I think we'll be going to 4% in just a few moments when the Bank of England behind me announces its latest interest rate move. That will add roughly about 70 quid to the monthly payment on an average mortgage. So this is real money, Mark. This is real pain that's going to be felt by borrowers across the economy, whether they're house owners, they've got other borrowings on cars, utilities and all the rest of it. The Bank of England knows that. It wants to limit these interest rate rises. But I think we're going to hit 4% today and possibly moving to 4.25% in the months to come.
And, of course, not just those people with mortgages looking at how much that's going to take per month. Business has to borrow, and, of course, it's going to push up their prices as well at a really difficult time.
Exactly right. The Bank of England raises interest rates. It doesn't just slow down consumption by eating into household budgets. It also slows down business investment, which, of course, is the engine room of growth and jobs. And so it is a balance that the Bank of England has to strike. It won't want to raise interest rates more than it has to squeeze out inflation, but we still have very high double-digit inflation. It was just still over 10% in December on the last figure. And so that's way above the Bank of England's 2% inflation target. Crikey, 5 times more.
Yeah.
So the Bank of England won't hesitate, I think, to raise interest rates today. But this could be the penultimate rate rise, with the last one coming, in my view, and it is a guess, this spring.
Yeah, interesting, of course, that last time around in December, there were 2 people who wanted to stay at 3%. So clearly there is still those voices of caution that, they push it a bit too far and stop the economy dead in its tracks.
Indeed, Mark, there are 9 members of the Monetary Policy Committee inside that building. You've got about half the committee is bank insiders, full-time bank staff members, including the Governor, Andrew Bailey, the Chief Economist, Hugh Pill, the former Goldman Sachs investment banker. Then you have external economists who are appointed by the Treasury who stand or fall on their independence. There is an active debate going on in the Bank of England. As you say, some economists want to keep interest rates where they are. Other economists will want to increase them more to bear down on inflation. They then take a vote, and I think the vote will come out today for a 50 basis points. That's a 0.5 percentage point rise, Mark, from 3.5 to 4%. We'll get the decision literally any minute now. I'll look down at my phone, and that should add, as I said, around 70 quid to the monthly payment on the average mortgage. So, proper money.
Yeah, and of course, let's reflect, we get the views of the bank as well. Andrew Bailey, the governor, looks forward at the prospects for Britain. Of course, we had this IMF warning that we'd be seeing the lowest growth figures of any advanced economy. So the picture that's given the economy as important, perhaps, as this headline rate.
It is, and look out on your phone. I'm looking down, Mark. The decision literally is any second now. The Bank of England will release some new forecasts today. I've said to you over recent weeks, I think the latest Bank of England forecasts a few weeks ago were far too gloomy. They were predicting the longest recession in the UK on record, suggesting that the economy would be contracting throughout this year. I don't think that's true. I think the IMF, the International Monetary Fund,
Liam, it is 4%. Just to
on those gloomy figures.
Yeah, just to alert people, we've got the 0.5%, the full expected, and that contrasts with what we saw in the United States, the Fed only going 0.25%. So clearly they are still worried about what inflation is doing to the economy.
They are. Let's see if we can put those numbers rapidly onto a graphic that we prepared earlier. So you can see from this graphic, GBNews viewers, radio listeners will have to bear with me, that interest rates were well below 1% during the years before the COVID lockdown. During lockdown itself, rates went all the way down to just 1/4% at emergency levels. Since that lockdown ended, we've seen successive rate rises, 10 successive rate rises now to 4%. That 0.5 percentage point increase today, as you can see, that takes interest rates to a 14-year high, the highest they've been pretty much since the global financial crisis in 2008-9. This will slow down the economy a little bit more. The Bank of England, the economists in the Bank of England, the 9-strong Monetary Policy Committee, it will be interesting to see the breakdown of those votes. There may well be some MPC members who didn't want a rate rise today or only wanted a 0.25% rate rise because, economics is not an exact science. Reasonable, intelligent people can have different points of view. You can easily say, I think there's going to be a lot more inflation. You could say, I think actually inflation is now going to quite quickly come under control. I tend to be in the latter camp, and that's why I think that after today's rate rise to 4%, there'll be one more rate rise to come of 0.25%. You say that's what the Federal Reserve did earlier this week, the most important central bank in the world there in the US. But that's because US inflation now is down at 6 or 7%, much, much lower than it is here in the UK, where we are still, at least on the December numbers, Mark, in double digits.
And we reflect on what Andrew Bailey has said before, of course, the bank believing that the recession will be shallower, although maybe slightly longer. And this is the nuanced judgment they've got to make alongside all those other forecasts, including that IMF one, about how hard you put that foot on the brake.
It's all about credibility, Mark. Central banking is about hard-won credibility, credibility that's easy to lose. I personally think, and I say this with regret, I'm a big supporter of independent central banking. I have been all my professional career as an economist, but I do think the Bank of England lost credibility last year. It was far too complacent about inflation. It kept saying, oh, this inflation is going to be transitory, and all the rest of it, where commentators like me were saying, no, it's not, it's going to be very serious. So the bank was too slow to start raising interest rates, in my view. That's why it's had to raise them more than it otherwise would have, to convince financial markets, to convince those investors who lend the UK government money buying what we call gilts or government IOUs or bonds. They have to be convinced that the Bank of England is serious about getting on top of inflation, hammering those price rises out of the system. Because if they don't think the Bank of England is serious, they'll charge the British government a lot more money in order to lend, in order to give money to the British government to pay for all the public services that we need. So it is a credibility game here, and by going for a 50 basis point, a half percentage point rise, in my view today, the bank is asserting its credibility. It could have followed the Fed and gone for a quarter point. It's gone for a half point, the more painful option, as if to say, no, we are really very serious, financial markets, about getting rid of this inflation so you can lend us money more cheaply, so that's better value for British consumers. Yeah,
let's talk about the pain. Some 1.6 million people estimated to be on mortgages at the moment. Variable rates, average extra on a tracker, about 50 quid a month, already facing other raised costs, and of course that's out of taxed income. So I guess a lot of families will be trying to crunch the numbers. And it's interesting, we got Which, the consumer group, pointing out that about 2.3 million households have missed or defaulted on at least one payment on a mortgage, rent, loan or credit card in this month's January or last month January alone.
Look, I would say this. If you are coming off a fixed rate deal, and the vast majority of mortgages are on fixed rate deals, about 8.5 million, about 2.5 million on variable rates, as you say, Mark. If you are coming to the end of a fixed rate deal, then I would wait before going for another fix. I would wait until interest rates are starting to come down. The next move, I would wager a fair amount of my own personal money that the next move in interest rates will still be up. You don't want to fix your mortgage when there's still more rate rises to come. You want to fix your mortgage when there's at least one rate cut in the can, with more to come because inflation's falling. I do believe, I'm not qualified to give financial advice, at least not on television. I do believe, though, as a matter of opinion, that rates will be coming down towards the end of the year.
Right.
And there will be a mood, a consensus that we're on top of inflation. So don't fix your mortgage now. That's my surmise, my advice, but it's not professional financial advice
No,
stress.
absolutely, because the FCA won't like that. But let's actually just address some of the figures that we got coming out. As you were describing about the committee itself, we're now being told 7 members voted to increase this 0.5%, 2 voting to keep it unchanged. And in terms of its assessment of what's going to happen, the bank predicting a recession 5 consecutive quarters to fall by 0.5% this year. Now, that's, I think, a slightly shorter and shallower drop than was previously being talked about.
Well, it's slightly less of a dip than the IMF are predicting. They're predicting 0.6%. But I haven't seen the report, Mark. I've been looking down a camera lens to you, talking to GBNews viewers and listeners since that report came out. But it seems to me that the length of recession they're predicting, with all due respect, is pretty much the same as the length of recession they were predicting before. I still think the Bank of England, having been slow off the mark to spot inflation, is now over-egging it. They're now overdoing, in my view, the economic gloom. I think the British economy will recover a lot quicker than that, despite these interest rate rises. So I personally think that the Monetary Policy Committee and the Governor, with all due professional respect to them, on that basis are wrong. But of course, this is economics. Nobody really knows anything. That's why they call it the dismal science.
Yeah, and it keeps us in business as well. Liam, at the bank for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you shortly, but let's just actually reiterate what the bank is saying about the way ahead. It's now saying that the recession that it's seeing, what it calls the peak to trough GDP or growth drop, will be 1% compared to its previous forecast of a 3% drop. So it's not going to be quite as bad as they say. But as you can see there, 4% is the base rate now, up 0.5%. What does that mean for you if you're trying to borrow or thinking of buying a property? Well, Labour's warned that homeowners not on fixed mortgages could see annual hikes now totalling thousands of pounds. That might be overdoing slightly, but mortgage approvals dropping to fresh lows, of course, so not an easy time for households already battling with the soaring energy and food bills. Let's speak now to mortgage advisor and broker Sally Mitchell joining us. Sally, thank you very much indeed for your time. Liam taking the time there to acknowledge that, he's not in a position to give proper advice as such, but clearly people are trying to work out when do they jump in and get a mortgage, when will rates perhaps fall back a little bit. What's the market going to look like?
Oh, it's so difficult to predict. If we all had crystal balls, well, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. One thing's for sure, the advice, not to jump in and fix when rates are high is fabulous, but most people don't have the luxury of making that choice. There are 1.8 million people coming off fixed rate mortgages needing to remortgage this year. So for those people, they are stuck between really a rock and a hard place. They either drop onto a standard variable rate with this increase. Obviously, that's going to be much higher than it has been. Or they choose the best rate they can. And the average 2-year fix now is, I've just written it down, at 5.44%.
Right, so that's 1.44% above the base rate. That's quite a bit extra on top, isn't it?
And that's changed. The important thing is also this isn't a sudden shock. That figure was 2.29 only in November. So we've already seen almost a doubling. And who knows what's going to happen next? And fixed rate will not change immediately, but they will change.
And is that because there are fewer products out there on the market that they can afford to actually perhaps push up the premium, as they would see it, on these products?
Well, the way they price their products is really based on swap rates. And we have seen in the last couple of months fixed products actually coming down in price, which has been wonderful to see. I would be quoting a month ago 6.3, 6.4, and now I can look at sort of 4.8, 4.6 perhaps for a very attractive candidate. So swap rates are slightly different. They play slightly differently to the Bank of England base rate. If you're on the an SVR, a standard variable rate product, or a tracker product, you will see that affected pretty immediately by the base rate increase. But
I think standard variable rate, they've estimated £31 for the average sort of mortgage at the moment, which doesn't sound much in itself. But of course, when you add in everything else that's going up, it can actually eat into your disposable income.
This is between sort of now and tomorrow.
Yeah.
These people have already seen an increase of hundreds of pounds in the last few months.
Yeah.
So it's tough. And then put in the cost of living, credit cards up to 19.99%.
Yeah,
I think we saw
obviously a lot of people have had to they've had to go on
lot.
plastic to try and pay for Christmas and so on. But can I just ask you about how the banks and the building societies are dealing with it? Are they flexible enough if people want to go and say, look, can you give me a rate for, say, 3 months so I can tide myself over until we get better fixed rate deals, for instance?
They do have strategies in place, a lot of the lenders. They are very sympathetic. I know there's a lot of talk in the industry about what they can do, what more they can do, because it's becoming much more of an issue. I think they need to be proactive, not quite so reactive. But certainly if you are in any sort of difficulty or you think you're going to be in difficulty, the first step is to contact your lender. And they will have strategies, perhaps swapping you onto an interest-only rate for a short term or payment holidays. It's important to note, though, that if you do take a payment holiday, it can negatively affect your credit report. So when you come to remortgage, you might find it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and of course, remember with interest only, it was the endowment mortgage that was to pay for that, and that itself has sort of went into a bit of a decline with a bad name now. So I guess the thing is, as always, get some expert advice before you jump in the water.
Well, I would say that because I'm a broker, but yes, now even more than ever, it's important to get that advice. And interest only, we wouldn't normally suggest it, not for a homeowner, non-investor, but sometimes it might be a good short-term option. But a good broker will be able to talk you through all the range of possibilities. We're becoming very imaginative.
Yeah. As your eyes going skywards, as I can see. We'll leave you to it, Sally. Thank you, because no doubt the phone will start ringing. People want to know which way to jump. But thanks for your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's now cross to our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, who's in Palmer's Green in North London, a business owner joining her. Because as we were just saying there, Lisa, of course, not just the homeowners, it's all the businesses now trying to work out the extra borrowing costs.
Yeah, exactly. As we just heard, the interest rates are going up, and this is going to have an impact on the housing market. People are already struggling to pay their mortgage. I'm joined by estate agent Omer Hegarty. Hi, Omer. So we just heard the news that the interest rates are going up once again. How's that going to impact on the housing market?
Quite negatively, to be frank. The interest rates are already high before they've gone up. The cost of living crisis is affecting both the sales and lettings market as things stand. So I don't see things getting particularly better in the foreseeable future with the increased interest rates.
I remember it wasn't long ago everyone was kind of fighting over houses. There was massive competition when a house came on the market. How are things at the moment?
I mean, compared to 12, 18 months ago, it's a completely different story. We had huge amounts of lending, really low interest rates, and people were just competing to go above and beyond to get the property of their dreams. Now you've got the complete opposite, where people are lowballing offers, you've got panic buyers, panic sellers, and you've got a very affluent lettings market because the prices have been driven up as a result of the interest rates passed on to landlords.
That's what I was going to ask next about the rental market, because that's gone crazy. How are you finding that?
Yeah, I mean, it has gone crazy. So with the increased interest rates, a lot of the buy-to-let landlords are on variable rates. So essentially all they're doing is they're passing on whatever increase they've got onto the tenants, and being that you've got less buyers now, being that it's more affordable to rent than it is to actually pay off a mortgage with the increased interest rates, they're going above and beyond to get a rental property as opposed to a sales property.
And what do you predict is going to happen over the next coming months?
I predict people still obviously buy and sell and move. There's always going to be a need for housing one way or another. Do I think it's going to be a very affluent market for the sales side? Probably not. But I think obviously there's going to be those same people looking for a home, and people do find a way to move, whether it's buying or selling or renting. So I think the lettings will go up a little bit, but there's going to be a lot of competition.
And what about new builds, so new constructions, properties that have been being built for a long time now? How are they selling well, or?
Frankly, no. They were obviously based on a very affluent market 12 to 18 months ago. With the increase in the cost of materials, the cost of labour, the build cost has come up and the sell values come down. So you've got a lot of either bulk sales going on, or where you've got the landlords or developers holding on to them and having to rent them out. They're trying to pass on those costs to new tenants, and that again is driving the rental market up to crazy heights that we haven't seen before in London.
And what are you finding most surprising at the moment?
I think that the willingness for people to obviously rent the lowballing offers, and actually the most surprising amount is the amount of lenders that are pulling mortgage offers. With obviously the increased amounts, they're where the interest rates were lower, they're trying to pull those offers to get the buyers onto a newer, higher interest rate.
Okay, thank you, Omar.
Pleasure.
So, as we heard there, this news is going to have a ripple effect throughout the housing market, whether that's rental or the sales.
Indeed, a lot of people doing their sums as we speak, Lisa, at the moment. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll have more analysis and assessment, of course, just to reiterate, interest rate, base rate up to 4%, up another 0.5%. More on that. And also marking 100 days since a certain Rishi Sunak took on a new job. How's the new boy been doing? We'll be assessing that in a moment. First, a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Fairly cloudy out there. It is pretty mild, though. Temperatures in double figures for most. And there is some rain across northern Scotland from these weather fronts. High pressure is the dominant feature, but it is to the south, and we've got westerly winds, which are bringing some light rain and drizzle to parts of northwest England, the hills and mountains of West Wales as well. But the heaviest rain is certainly across northern Scotland. Quite gusty in places, but not as windy as yesterday for most, although the winds will pick up through this evening over northeast England and eastern Scotland. Most places pretty grey, but some breaks in the cloud, a hint of sunshine across parts of the east. And we will see those temperatures, as I said, double figures for most. We could get up to 13 Celsius in one or two spots. That rain will continue for a time this evening, but ease off across the Highlands and the Western Isles before midnight. That rain then pushes southwards as a kind of a weak band, just turning a bit damp for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, most places dry. It will turn a little colder across northern parts with some showers in Shetland and Orkney. Further south, a very mild start to Friday. And a similar day on Friday, actually. In the west, a lot of clouds and drizzle over the hills of Wales. A bit damp for northwest England to start with. We will see outbreaks of rain across western parts of Scotland. But brighter skies developing, perhaps across parts of East Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Most places just dry and cloudy. And again, temperatures getting up into the teens in one or two locations and widely up to double figures. Won't be as windy on Friday either. As we go through the evening, we'll see that rain just heading its way across the Northern Isles. Still some drizzle over western hills, but most places looking dry. And many places will be dry into Saturday too. Certainly for England and Wales, we will see some rain for a time crossing Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most places turning brighter on Sunday with some sunny spells, but also colder.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. So, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak marking 100 days in office after succeeding Liz Truss back on the 25th of October, following her, of course, record with 44 days in office. Well, Mr Sunak's the youngest Prime Minister since 1812, and through these first 100 days, he's faced enough challenges already, perhaps, to establish his place in political history, good or bad. Darren McCaffrey has this report.
It was the job he fought for, then assumed he would never get. But on October 25th last year, Rishi Sunak walked into Downing Street as our new Prime Minister.
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name.
His first 100 days have been marked by the three S's: strikes, sleaze and stability. The Prime Minister's undoubted first success had been to stabilise the panicky financial markets after the calamitous tenure of Liz Truss. Confidence has been restored, but the economy remains bruised. Inflation continues to punch into double digits. Interest rates are still rising, and Britain is faced with a recession this year, unlike any other G7 economy. Real-term wage cuts are also provoking mass industrial action, not seen for decades. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, paramedics, railway workers, bus drivers, frankly the list goes on and on, have joined picket lines with no end in sight. Rishi Sunak has also failed to get away from the mire of Tory sleaze, losing 2 cabinet ministers so far. Gavin Williamson resigned within weeks amid bullying claims, and Nadeem Zahawi was sacked over his tax affairs. But the Home Secretary, who was found to have broken the ministerial code, remains in place, as does Dominic Raab, who's facing his own claims of workplace bullying. And so maybe it's not a surprise the opinion polls are looking grim for the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party. Some are now predicting a 1997 wipeout. The government insists, however, there is a narrow path to victory at the next election. And with a spring budget and local election campaign ahead, it is the next 100 days that will determine just how narrow that path is. Darren McCaffrey, GB News.
Well, let's get more now with Darren, who's in Downing Street for us. And Darren, as you're indicating, we had this attempt for him to set out a political agenda back in January with the sort of 5 points. But, of course, since then, he's just had to do this firefighting.
Yeah, indeed. It has seemed to be one scandal after another. Something Rishi Sunak, frankly, of course, would not have wanted. We've been spending weeks talking about Nadeem Zahawi and his tax affairs, and now it's very much on to Dominic Raab and those allegations of bullying. Allegations he has consistently denied, but have only grown louder, I would say, in the last couple of months. They date back years, however, when he's been Brexit Secretary, Foreign Secretary and Justice Secretary. And this is tricky for Rishi Sunak, not least of all because he is effectively his Deputy Prime Minister, someone who's very, very close to the Prime Minister. He headed up his leadership campaign during the summer, and there are growing calls from within and outside the Conservative Party for Dominic Raab to step aside while this investigation takes place. I think that seems unlikely, but it does feel that we're back in the same place we were a matter of weeks ago, that it is almost inevitable that we'll get to the point where Dominic Raab may well have to stand down. Though, as I say, Downing Street and others would insist there is due process. We have to wait for that result, and that these are mere allegations that he has consistently denied. But you add this into the fact that the Conservatives' poll ratings are not in a good place. Clearly, interest rates have gone up today, which means probably a mortgage hike for lots and lots of other people. and you factor into just this inability for the government to tackle some of the really big issues like strike action, for example, because we talk about this, don't we, Mark? You and I, day after day, about new strikes by nurses or teachers or paramedics, and yet the government strategy at the moment doesn't seem to want to bring this about to an end. And we're now facing potentially weeks, months more strike action too. So you add all that in, and all I would say is, ahead of a spring budget and local elections, the next 100 days don't look any easier than the 100 days that have just been.
Yeah, and of course we've had the opposition, particularly Labour, talking about the Tories crashing the economy. I'm seeing now that the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, already going out with this line about the Tory mortgage penalty having to be paid by homeowners in terms of the reaction of this 0.5% hike in the base rate.
Yeah, I mean, two things I would say about that. First of all, you know, clearly the rise in interest rates is not just confined to the United Kingdom. It's something that's happening elsewhere. In fact, almost in every major economy around the world. It is an instrument that central banks use to try and tackle inflation. Inflation is a problem across the world, though inflation is expected to fall in most parts of the world in the months to come. Now, the government's got an ambition of having it by the end of this year. I think that will almost certainly happen, irrespective of the government did or didn't do anything. Second of all, there is an association with these interest rate rises due to what happened under Liz Truss's administration. It's something that Rishi Sunak warned about last summer. So in many ways, Labour are accusing the Prime Minister of something that, well, he'd been warning about himself. So it's not necessarily his fault. But yes, there will be political ramifications for it. There is a notable bright spot in all of this, though, from the Bank of England this afternoon, saying that the economy is expected to go into recession, but this recession will be shorter and shallower than had been expected. In fact, the Bank of England at one stage predicted we'd already be in recession. That has not thus happened. And so the economic picture may not be quite as bad as initially thought.
And do you think that's feeding into this political calculation on the industrial relations, that they think perhaps if we can hold up, inflation does start to drop, therefore we can actually, say to the unions, well, double digit is not actually a position that we should be in, and it's going to buy themselves a bit of wriggle room?
Potentially. I think that there are people who make that argument within government and within the Conservative Party, behind closed doors, that maybe they just need to sit this out effectively, and that the unions kind of run out of steam, public opinion turns against them. Also, frankly, the members don't think it's sustainable because obviously for every strike day they are losing money. What I would say, though, about inflation is, inflation's not going to go down to zero. We're not going to see deflation anytime soon. Prices will continue to rise, and the reason that inflation is going to fall is because it's measured against the previous year. And now we've obviously had record high energy prices. This year, of course, in many ways, we're not going to see those records continue. But what it still will mean is that gas and electricity and food will continue to rise. And that means that average people out there, you, I, and everyone else, actually, will still see our real wages fall, because that's what happens. So yes, inflation may not be as bad. It may well meet that government target, but that still means all of us effectively, unless wages keep pace, effectively getting poorer. And that is where the unions would argue there are cases that in the end this is something that's also not related to the last year or two. It's something that's been related to the last decade, which in real terms, wages for nurses, teachers and others have fallen.
Indeed. Darren, thank you very much indeed on that 100 days on in this premiership at Downing Street. Let's just bring you a bit more reaction to this decision to hike the base rate by another 0.5%. The CBI Deputy Chief Economist Anna Leach says the bank's decision this month shows it's still too soon to call an end to peak interest rates. You will know that many economists saying 4% may actually be where it tops out. But Anna Leach saying inflation is coming down, but higher rates are still needed to bring inflation back to the bank's 2% target. So her assessment is that the pain may not be over yet. But let's reflect on what's happened, indeed, this lunchtime, with tenants who are renting properties being pushed to the limit. Landlords, they're also facing a unique struggle, it seems. Raise the rent and pay their own bills, or keep it at the same level and then risk going out of business. Well, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been finding out how landlords have been reacting to rising interest rates.
As the cost of living rises, so does the cost of where we live. According to real estate company Zoopla, the average rent in the UK in 2022 was 12.1% higher than the year before. But with the ripple effect of increased prices, many landlords are being left with no other choice.
A lot of our tenants are understandably asking if there's anything that we can do about their rent to bring it down. And unfortunately, in some cases, we've had to actually put the rent up because our bills have gone up and up and up. You know, we've got the utility expenses which have risen dramatically. We've got interest rates and the costs of our mortgages going up substantially. We've got the cost of labour and materials for repair and maintenance all going up. And this is having a huge effect on our business. It's all hitting the bottom line.
Landlords are often perceived as the bad guys. Of course, there are some who take advantage of tenants and increase prices by inordinate amounts. But is it fair to villainise them all?
As landlords get put under further and further pressure, as they are called out in the public media, it does make it increasingly difficult to run businesses. It makes that conversation with tenants increasingly difficult because that relationship's really, really important. But I think to taint all of the landlords with that same brush is dangerous.
The cost of living is effectively forcing landlords into a proverbial corner. And yet, many people are still calling for the government to impose a cap on private rental increases. However, as more and more landlords are driven out of the sector, there are fears around how capping could impact the supply of available housing.
If you want to encourage people to bring their properties to the market, if you want to have a sensible supply of properties, then actually the last thing that you should think about doing is capping rents. From the outside looking in, I can see that that might be an attractive move in the context of cost of living, but it's a false economy. And I think, government will need to tread very carefully before it starts meddling in the private rented sector.
Ultimately, as prices rise for tenants, they also rise for landlords. The challenge now is finding a short-term solution in which both sides can survive. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
So, interest rates up, profits up too, it seems. Oil and gas giant Shell recording its highest profits in more than 115 years. And Downing Street just coming out to say the government absolutely understands people's anger over Shell's record profits. More reaction then coming up on that. But let's get you the headlines now with Rihanna.
Mark, thank you. It's 12:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. As we've been hearing, the Bank of England has raised its base rate from 3.5 to 4%. It's the 10th increase in a row. It's also predicted a recession of 5 consecutive quarters, with output not likely to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2026. Sally Mitchell is a mortgage advisor and broker. She told us the rate change will have an immediate impact.
1.8 million people coming off fixed rate mortgages needing to remortgage this year. So for those people, they are stuck between really a rock and a hard place. If you're on the an SVR, a standard variable rate product, or a tracker product, you will see that affected pretty immediately by the base rate increase.
The SNP says Rishi Sunak's first 100 days in office have been dogged by a festering swamp of Tory sleaze scandals. The Prime Minister's under increasing pressure to reveal what he knew about bullying allegations against Dominic Raab and the tax affairs of Nadhim Zahawi. He's also being criticised as families continue to struggle with the cost of living crisis, while energy companies announce huge profits. The boss of British gas owner Centrica says he's horrified contractors for the company broke into struggling customers' homes to fit energy meters. His comments come shortly after energy regulator Ofgem announced it was launching an urgent investigation into British Gas. It follows a time sting in which an undercover journalist accompanied debt collectors who reportedly entered the homes of vulnerable people to force fit prepayment meters.
And around 2.3 million households missed an essential payment last month. That includes mortgages, rent and credit cards, new data reveals. According to Which's Consumer Insight Tracker, 59% of people had to either cut back on essentials, sell property or dip into savings to cover spending. It's calling on essential businesses, including energy providers, to do more to help customers. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Long here. So we've heard interest rates on the way up. Profits, too, it seems, are on the way up, particularly for oil and gas giant Shell. It's recorded its highest core profit figure in its 115 years, benefiting, of course, from the soaring energy prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So the core figure is some £68.1 billion for 2022, surpassing the industry expectations. It translates to 32.2 billion after taking out tax, interest and depreciation, the adjusted figure. But the figure's piling pressure, of course, on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to increase windfall taxes on companies. Labour, indeed, saying he was too weak to stand up to the energy firms. Let's get the views now of Simon Francis, campaigner at the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just to update everyone, so we're just getting news from Number 10. The Prime Minister's spokesman has been talking to reporters, saying the government's ready to take action if falling wholesale energy prices are not translated into lower petrol prices, pointing to the Competition and Markets Authority.
Yeah, so obviously we're seeing the government saying they're going to take action, but the question is, they've been given this opportunity before, and will they take this action? I think what's particularly galling about the Shell profits announced today is that this is the same firm that just a few months ago was found to have not passed on the full extent of the energy bill support scheme discount that the government had provided to its customers, not paying out in April but delaying the payments till not paying out in October, but delaying the payments till April. That is just, I suppose, in the phrase goes every little helps when it comes to energy firms' profits, and that would just be another piece of that pie. But it really shows the problems that there are in the energy market, that these prices and these profits are being generated at the expense of people who are living in cold, damp homes this winter.
Yeah.
And it's really,
I mean, I guess the problem is for the UK government, though, that only 95% of these profits with a multinational giant like this is actually made within Britain. So there's limited scope for what the government can do. And indeed, the same Downing Street briefing indicating that the headline tax rate now on Shell, comparable with other countries such as Norway, at 75%. You know, that's a pretty hefty tax take, isn't it?
It is, but it's still not at the same level as Norway, which is 78%. And actually, you know, kind of it could go even higher given the amount of money that people are making off it. So, you know, there was reports out yesterday that the BBC had that, you know, because of the way that the electricity pricing market works in this country, our bills are inflated by £250 on average because of the way that the energy market is regulated and pricing is structured. That's money that's being made by these energy firms and that are being reported today in profits. Again, you've talked about the Centrica story as well. You know, these are companies that are making huge amounts of money off the misery of other people, and that's what we object to, and that's what we think the government should be taking action to stop.
So you think what more state intervention in the policing, for want of a better word, of such companies?
Well, it's clear that the companies can't regulate themselves. I mean, you know, take again the example of Centrica. You know, they were telling the government, they were telling ministers and everyone that they don't install prepayment meters on people who are vulnerable. They take those people into account. They don't use the court process to do that. The investigations and your reports today on this subject have shown that that is just not true, that they have misled the government on this, that the energy firms just simply can't be trusted at the moment, and therefore the government has to act.
And what are the argument, which I think Ed Miliband has alluded to before? I mean, Labour perhaps would not want to talk about nationalisation, but certainly bringing more of our critical infrastructure, such as energy supply, under state control.
Well, I think there's ways that the market can be reformed as it currently is without huge levels of intervention. So, for instance, there's proposals that many of the members of the End Fuel Poverty Coalition and the Warm This Winter campaign have put forward around so-called social tariff. So that produces a lower tariff of energy for those who are in the most vulnerable situations. So if you have to use electronic charging for your wheelchairs or for medical equipment or for running fridges to keep them cold. Alternatively, you could look at a proposal such as an energy for all allowance. So everyone has the basic allowance that they need to stay warm and to heat their homes. And then if you have excessive use because you've got, you know, kind of your hot tub running or things like that, then obviously you're going to be paying more for that. And that subsidises the cost for lower use consumers. So there's lots of different ways that the energy market could be reformed. What we need to see is the government have the ambition and the drive to not only take the short-term steps to eradicate the excesses and the worst excesses that we're seeing, but also have that vision to sort of reform the market so it works better for the country.
Right, and one assumes that the smart meters that we hear about provide the technology for that to take place, because I guess a lot of people are scratching their heads wondering, you know, why does a smart prepayment meter actually get charged at a higher rate when presumably it should be leading to more efficient energy usage?
Hit the nail on the head, and there's a real problem there in terms of the smart meters and their prepayment mode, because they don't need a court warrant to switch your smart meter to a prepayment mode. The energy firm can do it with 7 days notice and the flick of a button. That is another really big concern that we have, that we feel the government has to act on and has to address, because that can't be allowed to happen, because that does undermine the rollout of the smart meter program. And you know, as you say, if we're going to get kind of the reforms that we need and you know, an intelligent 21st century energy market, then we are going to need to see things such as the use of smart enable us to do that.
Simon at End Fuel Poverty Coalition, thanks for joining us there in Edinburgh. Thank you for your time. Well, let's turn to Australia now, go down under, because King Charles's image will not be featuring on their new $5 banknote. The country's Reserve Bank announcing that decision after consultation with the Australian government. So the future design will pay tribute, they say, to the culture and history of first Australians, the Indigenous people. Well, let's speak now with royal commentator joining us once more, former BBC royal correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, thank you for your time. And, of course, we do reflect that the Queen held quite a fond place for Australia in the Commonwealth family. But you know, relations now have changed and developed over the years.
Indeed, Mark, and good afternoon to you. This is not a slap in the face to King Charles, but rather it's a boost for, as you've said, the First Nations of Australia. And instead of the monarch's head, we'll be seeing on Australian $5 notes key figures from the Aboriginal history, the Indigenous peoples of Australia, and there are several of them that will be on there. I'm sure we can all think of good nominees. Perhaps Yvonne Goolagong comes to my mind. And so it's not a setback for the monarchy, and it's not anything to do with Australian republicanism, which is quite a strong thing. Bear in mind that it wasn't until 1960 that the Queen's face appeared upon British banknotes. Before that, before 1960, and she'd been on the throne for 8 years then, it was just the facade of the Bank of England on the £1 note, and there was just copperplate script on the great big white fivers. And of course, up in Scotland, where there are 3 banks that are allowed to issue banknotes, the monarch very rarely appears. There have been exceptions, but since George IV in the early days of the 19th century, the monarch hasn't been on Scottish banknotes. There was an exception at the time of the Golden Jubilee, when there was a special note issued, which did, of course, depict Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that the coins down there will still keep the Queen's head, and then King Charles's head as well on the new coinage. So the link is still there. But you referred, of course, to the Republican movement. There was a vote, I think, 1999, wasn't it? I mean, where are we with that relationship with Australia? Is it still now, a friendly cousin?
Absolutely. And as you say, the coins will bear the image of King Charles, and all those coins will stay in circulation. And it's also a fact that the higher denomination notes in Australia did never carry the monarch's image. Publicanism in Australia, and I've had some close study of it, it comes and goes. It is there, very much so, but the Australians have always come to decide that they are better sticking with the constitutional monarchy, which has served them pretty well to date, rather than go through the trauma and divisive process of electing a president, which might bring more problems than they particularly want. So the tried and true has been stuck with, and there is, as you say, a tremendous kinship. I think at one stage, 1 in 10 Australians has got British relatives. We all love the country. We all think it's fantastic, and there is that kinship, and blood is thicker than water.
And would you expect a royal tour of Australia and the other Commonwealth countries to be on the diary fairly soon?
I think there are many. I haven't checked. Well, it's a jolly good question, but I think the Prince and Princess of Wales are going there fairly soon.
Yeah.
William, Kate, and I think they may even be taking the children. That will be big news, and I think it will go down very well. Perhaps not as huge as it was when William's mother, Princess Diana, went there. And I mean, the whole country went on fake. It was almost as big as ABBA, we can say, about that one, Mark. But I think there is tremendous affection, and those ties that bind are very important. And they've seen the country through a lot. It's more than 200 years. I think it's 225 years. I remember going there for the 200th anniversary of the first fleet arriving in Botany Bay in Sydney. So let's hope the ties continue to bind, because we love the Australians, except when we're playing them cricket.
Indeed, or rugby, but we'll reflect on that later. I think we're building their new submarines, actually. I just remember Ben Wallace announcing that in the Commons, of course, just a day or two ago. But as ever, Michael...
I'd rather put out President Macron out a bit, didn't
well,
it?
Indeed. Yeah, we'll as Australian wine does at the moment. However, that's another topic. Michael, as ever, thank you for your time. Great to see and speak to you. Thanks very much indeed. Well, from Australia to the United States now, getting around the globe, because Nikki Haley, two-term governor of South Carolina, former US ambassador to the United Nations, reportedly set to announce she's seeking the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, the second for the candidacy. Yes, former boss, someone called Donald Trump, launching his bid in November. Well, joining us in the studio once more is Greg, Chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Here we go with some new runners and riders coming out. We don't know perhaps too much about her outside the sort of diplomatic core, if you like, with the UN.
Yeah, that's where she got some visibility nationally and internationally, and I think she did a great job. But she was the governor, two-term governor of South Carolina, and that's really the great experience. And I think historically, governors end up, serving well as presidents. And
the administrative capability.
Of course.
Yeah.
And she was a congressperson before that. She was a three-term representative, and she was known as a real fiscal hawk in Congress. So that, I think, plays well, especially in the Republican primaries.
Yeah.
So she's got a great
still.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, she kind of became governor during the Tea Party wave in 2010, and she won by 4 points. But 4 years later, she won by 12 points. So she's got a little of that Ron DeSantis type resume.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come to Ron DeSantis in a moment. But how would Republicans feel about having a female president?
I think it's completely neutral. No, I don't think that they would elevate.
So the old guard is
because of that.
Okay.
But surely it wouldn't hurt her. I mean, look at Mrs. Thatcher did okay.
Yeah, the Iron Lady.
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that at all. In fact, if anything, it helps her, especially if she's running in the primaries against, 3, 4, or even 10 white males, right? So that, demographically, it's probably.
But one of those white males,
favor.
of course, appears to be Donald Trump.
Right.
How do you think he's going to cope with it? What would his strategy be he'll have to be very careful about how he approaches this.
Yeah, I think you have to be very careful. I don't think he could get into the same habit of criticizing and name calling. Remember, she did work for Trump. She was his ambassador. Yeah. They got along very well.
As we can see in these pictures. Yeah.
And he's, even recently spoke very highly of her and even about her possibly running for president. So I think that he would probably treat her differently than he treated Hillary. But I do think that, he would have to be a little bit more delicate in his criticism.
But reflective, perhaps.
Right. And again, that like Mike Pompeo, she worked in his administration. So it's not.
She knows the tricks of the trade.
This is not Trump versus the establishment.
Okay.
This is, the other candidates that are going to run, including Nikki, are very much Trump-type Republicans in the sense that they've been disruptive.
Yeah, but DeSantis still a favourite, a front runner because of the Latin American vote that he could bring in.
Partly that, yes, he did really well. He won Miami-Dade,
Florida.
He won by 19 points, but he won some districts that typically favor Democrats. So he's really broken every demographic. He's in a great position. So yeah, I think that I think a lot of Republicans would look at him as the front runner, and that's where he's polling.
While you're here, we'll ask you about the view of President Biden and the latest. I think it's his beach house now being searched for documents, and this has bedeviled both Democrats and Republicans. Of course, let's reflect. But what would the Republicans make of that? It has to be seen to be followed through, and the legal process applies to both parties.
That's right. And look, I think if it wasn't for the raid on Mar-a-Lago and all the drama around Trump's documents, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. I think it's more pointing out the hypocrisy of it, both the treatment.
What the Democrats were saying.
Yeah, the treatment by the media, treatment by the FBI, especially Justice Department. And also, I think it's what comes out of these documents, the connections to China, Ukraine, Russia, and I think that's what's more important. I don't think it's going to be just on breaking a few rules on document retention. I think it's what those documents connect to. Many of them came...
What do Americans think of the great and good, though, stashing these things in boxes in their garages and
I think
outbuildings?
Yeah, I think the rules are going to have to change. Even Mike Pence,
exactly.
He's like squeaky clean, right? So I think that, there needs to be some clarity on, are these rules that are meant to be broken, or are they actual rules? Because anybody below the executive level, a rank and file State Department person would be going to jail. If
exactly. Or someone in business. They'd be in trouble.
So I think there needs to be some clarity there. But I think more importantly in this investigation, it's the connections from these documents to his time as vice president and the Biden cartel, we'll call it, of, family connections to China, Ukraine. And
yeah, which might be rather embarrassing at the very least.
Exactly.
Greg, as ever, thank you for coming in. Good to see you again. Thank you. Let's reflect that we've got that interest rate decision today, of course, up 0.5% to 4%. Latest analysis of that and what it means for the money in your pocket, or what's left of it anyway. Now the weather.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Fairly cloudy out there. It is pretty mild, though. Temperatures in double figures for most. And there is some rain across northern Scotland from these weather fronts. High pressure is the dominant feature, but it is to the south, and we've got westerly winds, which are bringing some light rain and drizzle to parts of northwest England, the hills and mountains of West Wales as well. But the heaviest rain is certainly across northern Scotland. Quite gusty in places, but not as windy as yesterday for most, although the winds will pick up through this evening over northeast England and eastern Scotland. Most places pretty grey, but some breaks in the cloud, a hint of sunshine across parts of the east. And we will see those temperatures, as I said, double figures for most. We could get up to 13 Celsius in one or two spots. That rain will continue for a time this evening, but ease off across the Highlands and the Western Isles before midnight. That rain then pushes southwards as a kind of a weak band, just turning a bit damp for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, most places dry. It will turn a little colder across northern parts with some showers in Shetland and Orkney. Further south, a very mild start to Friday. And a similar day on Friday, actually. In the west, a lot of clouds and drizzle over the hills of Wales. A bit damp for northwest England to start with. We will see outbreaks of rain across western parts of Scotland. But brighter skies developing, perhaps across parts of East Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Most places just dry and cloudy. And again, temperatures getting up into the teens in one or two locations and widely up to double figures. Won't be as windy on Friday either. As we go through the evening, we'll see that rain just heading its way across the Northern Isles. Still some drizzle over western hills, but most places looking dry. And many places will be dry into Saturday too. Certainly for England and Wales, we will see some rain for a time crossing Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most places turning brighter on Sunday with some sunny spells, but also a little colder.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime, the Bank of England pushes up interest rates again. The base rate now at 4%, with the 10th increase in a row. Not good news for mortgage holders. Many could see their annual increase in the thousands of pounds, with fixed-rate deals coming to an end. We'll have the very latest from the Bank of England with our man there, Liam Halligan. 100 days on from Rishi Sunak's premiership, has he managed to make his stamp on this top job, or is he still too busy firefighting? Dominic Raab's bullying allegations, the latest problems of dog number 10. Energy giant Shell's prompted anger after core profits hit 68 billion, the highest in its 115-year history. It points out it's already paying more than $1 billion in windfall taxes to the UK and EU, but should we be squeezing the oil and gas giant even further? And what are your views on all those stories? And, of course, what that interest rate's going to mean for you? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But let's get the headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's raised its base rate from 3.5 to 4%. It's the 10th increase in a row. It's also predicted a recession of 5 consecutive quarters, with output not likely to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2026. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey says today's rise reflects the economic uncertainties.
With inflation currently above 10%, we are in uncharted territory. Energy prices may not fall by as much as currently expected in financial markets. And even if they do, this period of very high inflation could play into price and wage setting in the UK economy to a greater extent than we assume in our central projection. The tightness of the labour market reinforces this risk. Our decision to increase bank rate today, despite a weak outlook in our central projection, reflects these uncertainties.
The SNP says Rishi Sunak's first 100 days in office have been dogged by a festering swamp of Tory sleaze scandals. The Prime Minister's under increasing pressure to reveal what he knew about bullying allegations against Dominic Raab and the tax affairs of Nadhim Zahawi. He's also being criticised as families continue to struggle with the cost of living crisis while energy companies announce huge profits. Leon Emirali, former aide to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, told us Mr Sunak's performance to date has been average.
I think he's got a solid C. I don't think he's done anything particularly remarkable. I don't think he's had a catastrophe. He has steadied the ship from that short-term economic shock after Liz Truss's mini-budget. I don't think he's necessarily weak, but that's the perception that's out there, and that's what Labour are running with. And in politics, once an idea is being seeded, it's very hard to shake that.
The boss of British gas owner Centrica says he's horrified contractors for the company broke into struggling customers' homes to fit energy meters. His comments came shortly after energy regulator Ofgem announced it was launching an urgent investigation into British Gas. It follows a Times sting in which an undercover journalist accompanied debt collectors who reportedly entered the homes of vulnerable people to force-fit prepayment meters. Shell says its profits have increased by more than 53%, with earnings of more than £68 billion last year. It's the company's highest profit in its 115-year history. The energy giants benefited from soaring oil prices due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A Downing Street spokesman has said the Prime Minister absolutely understands people's anger over Shell's record profits at a time of soaring household energy bills. Well, that as around 2.3 million households missed an essential payment last month, including mortgages, rent and credit cards. According to Which's Consumer Insight Tracker, 59% of people had to either cut back on essentials, sell their property or dip into savings to cover spending. It's calling on essential businesses, including energy providers, to do more to help customers. Well, meanwhile, households in England and Wales will see their water bills rise by 7.5% from April. Industry body Water UK says customers will pay an average of £31 more than they did last year. The annual bill for an average household will hit £448. That's the biggest increase in almost 20 years. And landlords are being urged to act now to address damp and mould in social housing. It's after an investigation revealed tens of thousands of homes have problems. The industry regulator says between 1% and 2% of social homes have serious damp or mould. The research follows the death of 2-year-old Awa Bishak, who was exposed to mould in a housing association flat. A 32-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court over the murder of Natalie McNally in Northern Ireland. The 32-year-old was stabbed in her home in County Armagh in December. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Stephen McCullough was rearrested on Tuesday after being previously arrested on December the 19th. He appeared at Lisbon Magistrates Court earlier. Elsewhere, Russia's foreign minister has accused the United States of being directly involved in the Nord Stream pipeline explosions in the Baltic Sea last year. Speaking on Russian state television, Sergei Lavrov provided no evidence for his claims. President Vladimir Putin has previously made allegations that Britain blew up the pipelines, which the UK government has denied. Mr. Lavrov also claims Russia wants to end the conflict in Ukraine, but he says can't because of the involvement from the West. And King Charles won't feature on Australia's new $5 banknote. The current image is a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, but the new design will pay tribute instead to the culture and history of Indigenous Australians. The country's central bank says it'll take a number of years to design and print the new notes. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's bring you some breaking news before we address the interest rates. And the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has announced that he intends to establish an independent statutory inquiry into the Omer bombing back in 1998. He's just been speaking to the House of Commons. He's made a statement there outlining his response to a court judgment that directed the government to establish some sort of investigation into the bombing back in August 1998. And much of that campaign carried out by Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan died in the bombing. With the result, the judge directed the state to act. Mr. Gallagher had said he hoped that we'd get a public inquiry. It seems that that is now going to take place. Just to remind you, this bombing in County Tyrone in August 1998, carried out by the Real Irish Republican Army, a splinter group of the IRA, which had opposed the ceasefire and the Good Friday Agreement. And it killed 29 people and injured 220. The telephone warnings had not actually specified the location 40 minutes beforehand, which meant that the police moved a lot of the people actually towards the bomb in the car on the high street there, which resulted, of course, in a lot of death and injury. So a public inquiry now announced into that. We'll get more reaction as it comes through. So the Bank of England has raised the base rate for the 10th consecutive time, putting it up by another 0.5% to 4%. And, of course, that will have an impact on thousands of mortgage owners across the UK and yet more financial pressure on households and businesses struggling with soaring energy bills. Well, this is what the bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, had to say in explaining their decision.
Today, we've increased bank rate by 0.5 percentage points to 4%. So obviously, I want to start by explaining why we've done this. And I'm going to start with the outlook for inflation. Since the November monetary policy report, we've seen the first signs that inflation has turned the corner. Annual consumer price inflation has come down from 11.1% in October to 10.5% in December. That's below where we thought it would be in the November report. And we think it will continue to fall this year and more rapidly in the second half of the year. This has a lot to do with energy prices. Last year's very large increases are now beginning to drop out of the annual calculation of the Consumer Price Index. Moreover, wholesale gas spot prices have fallen by around 50% since November, and gas future prices have also come down markedly.
Well, that was the Bank of England governor. Not exciting in terms of being a speaker, but of course what he's saying is very important. Well, let's get analysis now with our GB News business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, who's outside the bank there. Liam, as we're reflecting, he's not the most exciting of speakers, but of course what he's saying is absolutely crucial. And just to pick out a few things, I mean, indicating that if there were more persistent pressures, further tightening of monetary policy would be required, i.e. they could push rates even higher.
They could, Mark, but I think the point of that particular phrase was that interest rates may now be close to a peak There will only be more rate rises, the governor iterated in the press conference that took place in the Bank of England behind me after that interest rate move at noon. There will only be more interest rate moves if there are signs that inflation remains persistent, and yet the bank is saying that it expects inflation to fall quite quickly now, particularly in the second half of the year, and inflation has turned the corner. I'm sticking with my prediction of the last few weeks, Mark, that interest rates are now 4%, having just gone up by 50 basis points, half a percentage point from 3.5 to 4 at noon today. I think we'll see a peak of 4.25%, Mark, and then rates will stay steady and then start coming down towards the end of the year. Rates are already at a 14-year high. I hear lots of people our age and a bit older, Mark, saying, oh, well, in my day, in the late 80s and the early 90s, interest rates were 15, 18%, and we could still work hard and buy houses. But, of course, today's youngsters trying to get on the housing ladder, Mark, the cost of the houses they're trying to buy is much, much higher. So the share of their incomes they need for their mortgages and indeed their rent is way up there, as high as it ever was, even though interest rates are generally lower than a generation ago. So it is difficult out there. This interest rate rise today, it is a chunky half percentage point rate rise, the second in a row. I think the next rate rise will be just a quarter percentage point, but it is imposing real pain on shoppers and on borrowers. Depending on what kind of mortgage you've got, we're looking at between 30 to 50, maybe a little bit more extra pounds each month on your mortgage payment. So for most families across the country, that's proper money.
Yeah, already on top of what, of course, the increases they've seen so far. But as you picked out, I mean, this phrase is interesting that he's used about turning the corner and them softening their language in terms of this. But just a couple of other things that we picked up. I mean, Ben Broadbent, the Deputy Governor, pointing to the issues of the labour market, i.e. that, you know, it's still pretty tight, and that they've not seen people coming back into the jobs market. And, of course, that leads to wage inflation, and it feeds into all these discussions on industrial strategy at the moment with the public service unions.
Of course, we've seen a lot of inflation. We're still double-digit inflation, 10.5%, more than 5 times the Bank of England's 2% target. That's what's driving these high wage claims in the public sector and the private sector. That's what's causing all this industrial action. But the government will really cling on to the phrase there, used by the Governor of the Bank of England there, that inflation has turned the corner, and we now expect inflation to, quote, fall quite quickly. That's what the MPC's accompanying statement said. That's the Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists who decide interest rates. If the government can say to union bosses and the public, look, inflation is soon going to be falling quite quickly, it may be that they can do a deal with smaller wage rises. At least that's what the government will hope for. But still, there is wage inflation out there, not only because of wage claims, but also because here in the UK, almost uniquely compared to other major European economies, even though we've continued to have very, very high net immigration, despite Brexit, as the phrase goes, a lot of people just haven't come back to work after the lockdown. That's a major reason why we have wage inflation, a shortage of people, because so many people have exited from the workforce since lockdown.
Yeah, just looking again at what Andrew Bailey sort of setting out his stall. Of course, as you were saying, the bank had been criticised for being a bit late on parade, if you like, on this. Too soon to declare victory. But, of course, when they were looking at this whole situation of the recession, it's a bit more encouraging, perhaps not as long and not as deep, bearing in mind what the IMF was saying just the other day.
I still think the Bank of England, having been late to the party and understanding that there was big inflation coming down the track, I now think they're over-egging the doom and gloom, even today, Mark, after they have become a little bit less gloomy. Look, until this morning, the Bank of England was predicting that the UK economy was going to contract for the best part of 2 years. That's the longest recession in recorded history, or at least it would be if it was going to happen. They're now saying that the economy will contract for 4 or 5 quarters. That's a year or a little bit more. I still personally think that is too gloomy. Once inflation comes down, once there's a sense that interest rates are falling, once the British economy gets moving again, China's now coming out of COVID lockdown belatedly. That will get global manufacturing moving. As these supply chain issues ease post-lockdown around the world, and it's taking a while, longer than we expected, for them to do that, though there are now signs that's happening. There's less inflationary pressure in the supply chain. Firms are finding it easier to get hold of the components. I'm not saying that, you know, it's all sunlit uplands for 1 second, Mark, but I am saying that in my view, and in the view of a lot of people here in the City of London, by the way, we are starting to see the first signs of those green shoots, to use the former Chancellor Norman Lamont's phrase, perhaps ill-advisedly, but I'm willing to chance my arm here, Mark, put my head on the block and say I do think still, even though it's slightly less gloomy than it was this time yesterday, I still think the economists in the building behind me, Mark, they've got it wrong.
Let's hope they're watching. Liam, as ever, thank you for updating us there in Threadneedle Street, OK? And we'll assess more reaction as it comes through. Indeed, let's actually now join our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, because, Lisa, for the housing market, the estate agents, those about to buy or even renting, of course, they'll be busy doing their sums at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I'm on a high street, Palmer's Green in North London. It's full of small independent businesses. And of course, this news today is going to make life even more difficult for them. So I spoke to the Federation of Small Businesses to find out just exactly what the interest rates mean to them.
We hope this is the peak of the interest rate rises to control inflation. Inflation is obviously really bad, but by increasing interest rates, you see small businesses with mortgages come under significant pressure. They all took a lot of debt out for COVID, but they also have mortgages. It also affects the domestic consumer economy that small businesses rely on, so hospitality, retail. The whole point of interest rate rise is to take cash out of the economy, and unfortunately that means it'll take it out from people who want to spend it in bars, shops, pubs, and other businesses that are at risk.
So as Craig said there, obviously they're trying to tackle inflation, putting the interest rates up, but this is going to have a huge impact on businesses in many different ways at a time when they're already trying to deal with rising energy costs, rent going up. So it's definitely going to be a hard time for businesses for some time to come.
Yes, indeed. Obviously, they, I think, describing activity as anemic at the moment in terms of actually getting things going. But you're also talking just to an estate agent there a little earlier, and they're obviously hoping that this spring will see something starting to move in terms of the housing market as well.
Yeah, they said a few things were surprising, though it seems like the new builds they're not moving, so they're saying that's a surprising thing at the moment. The rental market has gone crazy because people are either not able to get mortgages or a bit hesitant to at the moment. So everything's a little bit surprising, very different to this time last year. So it all just seems like they're learning as they go along a little bit at the moment.
And the Bank of England might be actually sharing that assessment as well, who knows. Lisa, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in North London. Let's get the views now of Bob Liddon, financial analyst, joining us. And Bob, we've got the Governor of the Bank of England putting a bit of flesh on these bones in terms of the bank's assessment as to the way ahead. A couple of interesting things that, although too early to, as he said, declare victory, we're turning the corner.
Well, probably a very, very long corner. I don't see things in terms of what the Governor said at all. All they've done is equalise by raising 0.5% when the Federal Reserve Bank only raised by 1/4. They've equalised the mistake they made before the mini budget. And, you know, that mistake managed to get submerged. But that had a very similar effect to the pensions crisis, the mini budget, all added up to a bit of a meltdown. And now they've caught up with the Federal Reserve. So great, what's that got to do with their forecasts, which seem to change? You know, the 5-year forecast this afternoon is different from the 5-year forecast yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, I'm just looking at what Ben Broadbent, the Deputy Governor, is saying on that issue, basically saying global economic forecasts having to do with a number of factors, which, you know, obviously there's gas, there's Ukraine and so on, but what's happening in the labour market as well. I mean, one perhaps can understand how they are being a little cautious on the various moves they make either way.
Well, they're just following the Federal Reserve. They've lost control. They lost control by failing to get ahead of inflation. Then the Federal Reserve dismantled and led, and now the Bank of England's just following. And as I say, they moved today than the Fed made yesterday to play catch-up. And then we'll see in a few minutes, or we may already see, what the European Central Bank has done. Probably they have another explanation. Everybody has their own explanation. But the fact remains, they failed to get inflation under control. The Federal Reserve led the way. They led the way. We just followed.
OK, Bob, thank you very much for that. We're getting a bit of break-up on the signal. We'll have to leave it there. But, of course, we'll see what emerges in any future following of that Fed policy. Just to, of course, reiterate, they put theirs up by 0.25% a day or two ago. Now, coming up, more on United States, we're talking about Boris Johnson's trip to the States, where he's been urging the West, of course, to send those fighter jets, the F-16s, to Ukraine. Time, though, for an update on the weather for you.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Fairly cloudy out there. It is pretty mild, though. Temperatures in double figures for most. And there is some rain across northern Scotland from these weather fronts. High pressure is the dominant feature, but it is to the south, and we've got westerly winds, which are bringing some light rain and drizzle to parts of northwest England, the hills and mountains of West Wales as well. But the heaviest rain is certainly across northern Scotland. Quite gusty in places, but not as windy as yesterday for most, although the winds will pick up through this evening over northeast England and eastern Scotland. Most places pretty grey, but some breaks in the cloud, a hint of sunshine across parts of the east. And we will see those temperatures, as I said, double figures for most. We could get up to 13 Celsius in one or two spots. That rain will continue for a time this evening, but ease off across the Highlands and the Western Isles before midnight. That rain then pushes southwards as a kind of a weak band, just turning a bit damp for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, most places dry. It will turn a little colder across northern parts with some showers in Shetland and Orkney. Further south, a very mild start to Friday. And a similar day on Friday, actually. In the west, a lot of clouds and drizzle over the hills of Wales, a bit damp for northwest England to start with. We will see outbreaks of rain across western parts of Scotland. But brighter skies developing, perhaps across parts of East Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Most places just dry and cloudy. And again, temperatures getting up into the teens in one or two locations and widely up to double figures. Won't be as windy on Friday either. As we go through the evening, we'll see that rain just heading its way across the Northern Isles. Still some drizzle over western hills, but most places looking dry. And many places will be dry into Saturday too. Certainly for England and Wales, we will see some rain for a time crossing Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most places turning brighter on Sunday with some sunny spells, but also a little colder.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live this lunchtime. Now, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been talking at the Atlantic Council in Washington, where he urged the United States to send its fighter jets to Ukraine, saying it's the humane thing to do. He also dismissed the argument that the Ukrainians would not be able to fly the F-16 planes, for instance, and would require training in order to do so. Well, it's understood that he was not acting on behalf of Number 10, but speaking as a private individual. Let's get the views now of Mike Hewitt, retired Rear Admiral in the US Navy, joining us. Mike, thank you very much for your time. Firstly, on that point that Boris Johnson made, one assumes that the Ukrainians used to sort of flying Soviet-era MiGs would require some pretty heavy input on what to do with a sophisticated aircraft like the F-16.
Oh, thanks for having me. I don't think I would have any concern about the Ukrainians learning how to man, train, and equip F-16s. They've proven that they can operate quite quickly advanced technologies in the space. And so they're a very experienced fighting force. They've got a very robust Air Force. They've demonstrated their ability to not only safely operate the plane, but use it expeditiously in their campaign against Russia. So I believe what the Prime Minister is saying is absolutely accurate. And I also support his push to get these fighter planes into the hands of the Ukrainians.
What would they do, however, and we pick up that phrase fighter planes. I mean, I assume that in terms of the Biden administration saying no, they wouldn't want to see these things going into dogfights with Russian MiGs.
Well, ultimately, you already have this issue of command of the skies. And one of the things that I was disappointed in over a year ago was when the UK and the US determined what they wouldn't do in support of Ukraine, such as a no-fly zone, such as putting aircraft over the skies of Ukraine. But at a minimum, we should be able to equip the Ukrainians to defend their own airspace in that regard. And certainly you're going to see tactical engagements with the Russians, but you're actually seeing that today with devastating consequences for civilian lives. So I would highly encourage us to equip this military with what it needs and ultimately resource the victory that we've been discussing we'd like to see happen in Ukraine for the last year.
And of course, we remember those arguments about the no-fly zones going back to the Balkans conflict. And one would think that perhaps aerial superiority means you can actually do something about any kind of Russian spring offensive with the armor coming over the tanks and so on.
Yeah, the advanced fighters of today really aren't equipped to be in that kind of dogfight that we think about from the 20th century. They're really designed to be over the horizon, delivering missiles, defending airspace, defending the land beneath them. So it's not like you're going to see the kind of tactical engagement that many of us seen in the movies. This is really about delivering advanced weaponry at long distances and protecting the homeland.
So cruise missiles rather than Tom Cruise, then maybe is the approach. But just looking at that, at the political aspect of this, I guess the problem is that they can be seen as offensive rather than defensive, and the White House really rather cautious about that message that's sending to the Kremlin.
Well, we've been shooting behind the target with respect to Ukraine ever since the war began. And my frustration has been we could have stopped this from ever happening had we demonstrated the kind of resolve that we now seem to have in our political circles. And so, yes, these are offensive weapons, but this is not a defense of the homeland. This is about protecting the homeland. Yeah. And what Putin will understand is strength on strength. And I think that's the best deterrent we can possibly support for Ukraine right now.
OK, and I know the intelligence analysis is going on at the moment, but what do you believe could be the strength of any kind of Russian spring offensive? Have they got the kit and the manpower to actually mount that?
They absolutely do. And I think, unfortunately, what Putin understands is the long game here. And really what he's playing upon is the lack of political resolve. That's his best weapon right now in the U.S. with the Republicans, here in the U.K. with the discussions about resourcing the war.
Yeah.
This is exactly what Putin wanted, was a political infight by which we would limit the amount of support we would give the Ukrainians. So his spring offensive is really waiting for us to walk away from the conflict.
Mike, as ever, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your view and your assessment of the situation. Good to speak to you once more. Thank you very much indeed. Well, plenty more to come here in a moment with the latest reaction to the interest rates and what it shows about the state of the economy. But let's get an update on all the headlines now with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. 1:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised its base rate from 3.5 to 4%. It's the 10th increase in a row. It's also predicted a recession of 5 consecutive quarters, with output not likely to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2026. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey says today's rise reflects the economic uncertainties.
With inflation currently above 10%, we are in uncharted territory. Energy prices may not fall by as much as currently expected in financial markets. And even if they do, this period of very high inflation could play into price and wage setting in the UK economy to a greater extent than we assume in our central projection. The tightness of the labour market reinforces this risk. Our decision to increase bank rate today, despite a weak outlook in our central projection, reflects these uncertainties.
The SNP says Rishi Sunak's first 100 days in office have been dogged by a festering swamp of Tory sleaze scandals. The Prime Minister's under increasing pressure to reveal what he knew about bullying allegations against Dominic Raab and the tax affairs of Nadeem Zahawi. He's also been criticised as families continue to struggle with the cost of living crisis, while energy companies announce huge profits. The boss of British gas owner Centrica says he's horrified contractors for the company broke into struggling customers' homes to fit energy meters. His comments came shortly after energy regulator Ofgem announced it was launching an urgent investigation into British Gas. It follows a Times sting in which an undercover journalist accompanied debt collectors who reportedly entered the homes of vulnerable people to force fit prepayment meters. An independent inquiry into the 1998 Omer bombing has been ordered by the Northern Ireland Secretary. Chris Heaton-Harris's announcement follows long-running legal action brought by Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan was killed in the real IRA bombing. The explosion in County Tyrone killed 29 people, injuring hundreds more. And Shell says its profits have increased by more than 53%, with earnings of more than £68 billion last year, the highest profit in its 115-year history. The energy giant has benefited from soaring oil prices due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A Downing Street spokesman says the Prime Minister absolutely understands people's anger at a time of soaring household energy bills. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back with GB News Live in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice, We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the parents of the missing Lancashire mother, Nicola Bulley, say they fear that someone may have taken their daughter. Her father said the area next to the River Wye where she disappeared showed no sign of a slip or fall. She was last seen walking her spaniel along the riverbank on Friday morning last week, soon after the dog found with its lead and her phone, of course, still connected to a work call on a bench nearby. Well, as that search continues, our reporter Will Hollis has the latest for us.
Nearly a week on from her disappearance, and there's still no answer as to what happened to Nicola Bulley. Yet her friends are holding on to hope that they can find her.
Knowing that her two little girls are at home missing mummy, and knowing that mummy is missing is what's driving us forward. We know that knowing Nikki, her family are everything, and we know without a doubt that if she could be at home with them, that's where she'd be. We are just trying to hold on to the hope.
The making sense doesn't make sense if you gather us. Again, Nikki is just a lovely human being inside and out, living a normal life, dropping the children off at school, going on a daily walk, things planned, going out the weekend, seeing friends and family. Yeah, you just can't make sense that this is actually happening and here we are.
Nicola vanished from St Michael's in Lancashire last Friday. She dropped her kids off at school, then walked her dog Willow, a spaniel, down a familiar route along the River Wye at around 9:15. It's a popular place and usually busy. That was the last time she was seen. An hour later, her dog was found between the river and a bench. On the seat was her phone, still connected to a conference call. The sudden disappearance remains a mystery. Lancashire Police is keeping an open mind, but says it doesn't think she was attacked and isn't treating the case as criminal. The force and its partners are focusing on the river. The worry is that she's fallen in. Police divers and fire and rescue teams with sniffer dogs search below, while helicopters scan from the sky. Meanwhile, a man described as a key witness is speaking with officers. People living here in St Michael's are trying to make sense of what's happened to Nicola, but that's not all they're doing. They're also trying to help. And the local tennis club is being used as a base so that people can come down and offer their support. They've got maps of different walks along the River Wye, and every day groups of people are walking those routes trying to find Nicola. Even with the community treading every inch of the river's edge, the puzzle is yet to be solved. At home, Nicola's partner and family are stuck wondering. Her two young girls just want their mummy back. Will Hollis, GB News.
Yes, a very difficult time for a family, of course, and we'll update you whenever we get more from Lancashire Police on that inquiry. Now, Rishi Sunak is marking his first 100 days as Prime Minister today, but with the cost of living crisis squeezing people more and more, interest rates today, of course, going up once more, those Dominic Raab bullying allegations and the never-ending strikes and industrial strife, it's certainly been a challenging start for the Prime Minister. So how is the new boy doing? Let's speak now to Joanne Nadler, who's a political commentator and a former Conservative Party staffer. And Joanne, we remember the assessment that boring would be good in terms of being in number 10. It's not quite happened that way, has it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, as you quite rightly say, the times have been challenging and there's a great deal going on, and that's a sort of tumultuous set of circumstances for any leader to face. But I think that comment about boring might be refreshing, as it were, was more to do with the fact that we'd been through this extraordinary period in which personalities were dominant, and it was actually quite difficult to concentrate on any of the issues that really matter. So it's both, I think, a strength and a weakness for Rishi Sunak that personality politics is less prevalent now, and that to a certain extent things have been on that front rather calmer over the last 100 days. But there's also a big question mark, I think, hanging over the Prime Minister as to who he actually is, what his politics actually are, what his priorities are, and how he's really going to articulate and personify a compelling Conservative case for the next general election.
Yeah, and of course he tried to get those 5 points out, didn't he, in January, and stop the boats, and this is how we'd be measured. But of course, it's personality that has come back into play rather than the policy, particularly with Labour pointing out the difficulties. I think pointing out Keir Starmer's comment about the Tory addiction to sleaze, as he put it. It's going to be very difficult for Rishi Sunak to put that behind him.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think if Rishi Sunak is decisive, I think if he adopts an agenda and delivers on some of those points, particularly, I think, the small votes, if he's able to deliver on those things for people, then his lack of personal charisma won't really be an issue. I mean, at the moment, this issue of personality and charisma, it's a bit of a score draw between Rishi Sunak and between Starmer. So the point is we need to look at what they actually believe in. And although Keir Starmer in some ways seems quite tangible, quite credible, if you actually look at what his party is advocating, it's pretty extreme in a number of areas. And this is a huge open door opportunity for Rishi Sunak to come in. And as we've seen him do, for instance, on the issue of the Scottish Gender Recognition Act, to actually take some decisive action and carve out some clear blue water between the two main parties.
OK, we have got a bit of an interference on the sound, John, but we'll just stay with one more thought. How much is this going to be tied up with what happens to the economy? And we've got the Bank of England today reassessing perhaps things might not be too bad. We might have turned the corner. Is that really is going to decide whether he survives in this premiership or not?
Look, I think for the vast majority of voters, you're absolutely right. That is critical. And I think also for the strategy of the government, because we've seen Rishi Sunak, and this has been slightly underplayed, but we've seen the government keep quite a strong line on the issue of strikes and pay bargaining, for instance, and much to the irritation of the unions, which I think is why we're seeing such a politicisation of these industrial disputes. Now, obviously, the government's strategy is very much pinned on the idea that inflation is going to start to come down and that essentially the economy will balance out, and therefore he'll be able to make pay arrangements which the government can effectively support, which under the current circumstances they can't. So this is critical. Both people perceive themselves, how they perceive the government, but also to the government's strategy itself.
OK, well, we'll see what emerges, of course, after these 100 days and counting. But, Joanne, thank you for that. And apologies again for the interference on the signal. But we certainly heard you loud and clear. Now, let's turn once more to Australia and King Charles's image, which will not feature on the country's new $5 banknote. The portrait of Queen Elizabeth II to be replaced, too, by design honouring Indigenous Australians. That decision announced by the country's Reserve Bank. And it comes after consultation with the Australian government. The future design intended, they say, to pay tribute to the culture and history of the first Australians. The Queen's image, though, will be still printed on Australia's coins until the Royal Australian Mint transitions to the King later this year. So following the UK in that particular respect. Let's speak now to James Rowe, an Australian historian and political commentator. Just moving with the times, James?
I think so. Thank you very much for having me, Mark. It definitely seems like a step in the right direction. The timing seems appropriate because Australia is having a referendum this year as to whether or not we're going to enshrine a voice into the Constitution for Indigenous people. So it does feel that it's an appropriate time. And given that our foreign minister's been in the UK this week talking about coming to terms with our colonial past and all that it entails, I think it is an ideal opportunity to have this change.
Yeah, it's interesting, however, because, of course, it's not a very comfortable reflection on how the Indigenous population was actually treated. And there may be questions as to, how that's depicted on these banknotes.
It is true. There will have to be a level of consultation with First Australians to make sure that the artwork is culturally appropriate. I do know there's been some discussion in Australian politics at the moment where the opposition is not in favour of removing King Charles from the banknote, but it is set by the RBA, which has had independent monetary policy since the 1960s with guidance from the government. So it's not a government decision, it's a RBA decision that has been supported by government advice.
OK, and we do reflect that the Queen's head will still be on the coinage and then replaced as it wears out with King Charles as well. So the link is still there.
It is still there, and I think one of the most important things was when Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was elected to his position, Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, had a very quick and warm conversation. Our security and trade partnership with the UK will remain strong because at the end of the day, we have a relationship with the United Kingdom as a country, not with the monarchy as an institution. So I think the strength of our relationship will continue well into the future.
Yeah, and we had the referendum, of course, I think back in 1999. Where are we on the whole issue of the Republican debate? Because it may well be, of course, I think that the Prince and Princess of Wales may be preparing for a Commonwealth tour and perhaps a visit to Australia.
And I think that visit will be very timely in a way to ensure that the next generation of the monarchy wins affection in Australia. It's certainly not front and centre at the moment, Mark. We are having a referendum, as I said, about a separate matter this year, and I imagine it'll be several years away. And like you said, the one in the 90s was defeated because there wasn't a suitable alternative proposal. So any Republicans out there who are wanting it to be a success will have to come up with a strong model that wins the popularity of the Australian people.
James, thank you very much indeed for joining us over the many thousands of miles. Good to see and speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. It's James Rowe, their political commentator, joining us live in Australia. Now, as we've been discussing, the Bank of England has raised the base rate for the 10th time in a row, and the country trying to get things back on the tracks in terms of the economy. What does it mean for the consumers, though? Let's get the views now of Chris Southworth, Secretary General, of the International Chambers of Commerce in the United Kingdom. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Chris. I guess a lot of businesses will be perhaps of steeling themselves for this, but it's yet more pressure on them, isn't it, as they try to make the books balance?
Well, I mean, the number one priority here is to cool inflation, isn't it? And to just to manage down borrowing and spending and just cool off the economy. Obviously, there are risks here that it slows growth, but I think the number one pressure right now is cost. So any effort to bring those costs down into a more manageable way, I think, is an understandable rationale. I don't think businesses will have too much opposition around that at this point.
Yeah, just looking at what the bank's been assessing in its statement then, or the sort of conference afterwards, turning the corners, the phrase they've used, and suggestions that perhaps even though we'll be heading to recession, shallower and shorter. Does this give a little bit of relief to businesses trying to look ahead and wanting certainty, of course?
Yeah, I mean, the forecast looks a little bit more optimistic. I think looking at this in the international trade environment, the UK is having a particularly hard time, harder than all our G7 competitors. So, the signals are that inflation will come down this year. So that's extremely welcome, of course. But I think every business in the country understands the pressures that the public is under and therefore the decisions that the Bank of England and the government need to make.
Yeah, and looking at prospects for the economy, the very fact that, perhaps we're not going to be doing that well in terms of growth, but the Eurozone, for instance, actually avoided recession the last quarter of last year, suggestions that France may be doing quite well. Have we got sort of opportunity to export to the rest of Europe, even though perhaps things will be tight?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge, obviously, opportunity to improve exports. I mean, the most important point here is that, we need to grow the economy. What's missing in the growth strategy at the moment is trade. Trade wasn't mentioned at all in the budget.
Yeah.
But trade is absolutely central to the UK economy. We're an island economy. We're an import-export economy. We have a big footprint worldwide. We absolutely need strong relationships with the rest of the world, particularly Europe, where nearly half our trade is undertaken. So every effort right now to drive trade, to remove barriers to trade. We have the Electronic Trade Documents Bill going through Parliament right now. That's an absolute transformative piece of legislation that will allow us to remove all the paper out of the trade system, 4 billion documents worldwide, and allow us to remove some of those frictions that at the moment are really acting as a huge problem, particularly for small companies.
And of course, we're assessing where we are 3 years on from that Brexit sort of removal. And suggestions maybe that the protocol in terms of Northern Ireland, that we may be getting close to some kind of answer to that. I mean, how harmful has that been, and how hopeful are you that we are indeed getting to the end of that particular impasse?
Well, I think there's no doubt at all that Brexit has harmed the economy. I think there's been lots of commentary about that. I think it's very, very clear in the figures, and it's very clear that that's the difference largely between us and our G7 competitors. The most important thing now is how we build back so that problem is addressed over the course of time. The Northern Ireland issue is really important. We've obviously been in this impasse for a long time. What looks like an agreement with the EU on this idea of green lanes, red lanes for goods moving between the mainland and Northern Ireland and then into the continent, I think is a very pragmatic solution. That will be very, very welcome from a business point of view. And then I think importantly, this piece of legislation that I mentioned earlier on is going to give us the ability to take even more frictions out of that border environment between both us and Northern Ireland as the mainland, but also the UK and Ireland and Europe in general. So, it looks like we've got some positive signals coming. That's going to be extremely welcome. More positive relationships with Europe as well. I think that's extremely welcome. It's so important that we're working with our European colleagues to ultimately drive UK growth and opportunities that come with it.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks for joining us here on GB News. Well, of course, we are still assessing the impact of this base rate rise, 0.5% announced at lunchtime. Particularly, let's talk about the rental sector of housing, because tenants renting properties being pushed to the limit. The landlords, though, facing a bit of a struggle as well, because they've got to decide if you raise the rent, of course, to pay their own bills, or keep the figures going at the same rate and then risk going out of business. Well, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been finding out how landlords have been reacting to the ever-rising interest rates.
As the cost of living rises, so does the cost of where we live. According to real estate company Zoopla, the average rent in the UK in 2022 was 12.1% higher than the year before. But with the ripple effect of increased prices, many landlords are being left with no other choice.
A lot of our tenants are understandably asking if there's anything that we can do about their rent to bring it down. And unfortunately, in some cases, we've had to actually put the rent up because our bills have gone up and up and up. We've got the utility expenses, which have risen dramatically. We've got interest rates and the costs of our mortgages going up substantially. We've got the cost of labour and materials for repair and maintenance all going up. And this is having a huge effect on our business. It's all hitting the bottom line.
Landlords are often perceived as the bad guys. Of course, there are some who take advantage of tenants and increase prices by inordinate amounts. But is it fair to villainise them all?
As landlords get put under further and further pressure, as they are called out in the public media, it does make it increasingly difficult to run businesses. It makes that conversation with tenants increasingly difficult because that relationship's really, really important. But I think to taint all of the landlords with that same brush is dangerous.
The cost of living is effectively forcing landlords into a proverbial corner. And yet, many people are still calling for the government to impose a cap on private rental increases. However, as more and more landlords are driven out of the sector, there are fears around how capping could impact the supply of available housing.
If you want to encourage people to bring their properties to the market, if you want to have a sensible supply of properties, then actually the last thing that you should think about doing is capping rents. From the outside looking in, I can see that that might be an attractive move in the context of cost of living, but it's a false economy. And I think, government will need to tread very carefully before it starts meddling in the private rented sector.
Ultimately, as prices rise for tenants, they also rise for landlords. The challenge now is finding a short-term solution in which both sides can survive. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
And we'll be getting the views of Liam, who's been at the Bank of England for us this morning. He's coming back with all the latest from The Economist as to the prospects for us all in this year ahead. Also be asking, what should you be wearing if you're off to the races? Should it be suit and tie or just the jeans? And what about the weather? What are you going to be wearing for that? Let's update you now.
Hello, Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Fairly cloudy out there. It is pretty mild, though. Temperatures in double figures for most. And there is some rain across northern Scotland from these weather fronts. High pressure is the dominant feature, but it is to the south, and we've got westerly winds, which are bringing some light rain and drizzle to parts of northwest England, the hills and mountains of West Wales as well. But the heaviest rain is certainly across northern Scotland. Quite gusty in places, but not as windy as yesterday for most, although the winds will pick up through this evening over northeast England and eastern Scotland. Most places pretty grey, but some breaks in the cloud, a hint of sunshine across parts of the east. And we will see those temperatures, as I said, double figures for most. We could get up to 13 Celsius in one or two spots. That rain will continue for a time this evening, but ease off across the Highlands and the Western Isles before midnight. That rain then pushes southwards as a kind of a weak band, just turning a bit damp for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, most places dry. It will turn a little colder across northern parts with some showers in Shetland and Orkney. Further south, a very mild start to Friday. And a similar day on Friday, actually. In the west, a lot of clouds and drizzle over the hills of Wales, a bit damp for northwest England to start with. We will see outbreaks of rain across western parts of Scotland. But brighter skies developing, perhaps across parts of East Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Most places just dry and cloudy. And again, temperatures getting up into the teens in one or two locations and widely up to double figures. Won't be as windy on Friday either. As we go through the evening, we'll see that rain just heading its way across the Northern Isles. Still some drizzle over western hills, but most places looking dry. And many places will be dry into Saturday too. Certainly for England and Wales, we will see some rain for a time crossing Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most places turning brighter on Sunday with some sunny spells, but also a little colder.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock and you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this hour, interest rates up again, the 10th increase in a row by the Bank of England. The base rate now standing at 4%, up 0.5%. So mortgage owners could see their annual rises in the thousands of pounds, with many fixed rate deals, of course, coming to an end. We'll have the latest with Liam here in the studio with us. 100 days into Rishi Sunak's premiership, plain sailing, or has he steered into choppy waters? Of course, those Dominic Raab bullying allegations, the latest problem to rock the number 10 boat. And all change for fans of the Sport of Kings, the Jockey Club relaxing its rules on what to wear at the races. We'll get the lowdown on the new sartorial code and find out if you should be wearing one of those. Get in touch with your views on all those issues of the day, of course, as ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk, particularly how that interest rate rise is going to affect you. But first, an update on all the headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised its base rate from 3.5 to 4%. It's the 10th increase in a row. It also says the UK is set to enter recession this year, but stresses the economic downturn could be shorter and less severe than previously expected. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey says today's rise reflects the economic uncertainties.
With inflation currently above 10%, we are in uncharted territory. Energy prices may not fall by as much as currently expected in financial markets. And even if they do, this period of very high inflation could play into price and wage setting in the UK economy to a greater extent than we assume in our central projection. The tightness of the labour market reinforces this risk. Our decision to increase bank rate today, despite a weak outlook in our central projection, reflects these uncertainties.
An independent inquiry into the 1998 Omer bombing has been ordered by the Northern Ireland Secretary. The announcement follows long-running legal action brought by Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan was killed in the real IRA bombing. 29 people died in the explosion in County Tyrone. Hundreds more were injured. Speaking in the House of Commons earlier, Chris Heaton-Harris explained the inquiry will have the power to compel testimony.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I intend to establish an independent statutory inquiry into the Omer bombing. I've informed Mr Gallagher and members of the Omer Support and Self-Help Group, as well as representatives of families moving on, of this decision. The inquiry will focus specifically on the 4 grounds which the court held as giving rise to plausible arguments that the bombing could have been prevented. Thirdly, the inquiry will involve the next of kin and will be open to public scrutiny where possible.
A former soldier has been given a suspended sentence of 3 years for shooting a man in the back at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland 35 years ago. In November, David Holden was convicted of the manslaughter of Aidan McAnespie in 1988. The 23-year-old was on his way to a local football match. Holden was the first veteran to be found guilty of an historical offence in Northern Ireland since the Good Friday Agreement. He was sentenced earlier to 3 years, but the judge suspended the full term. A 32-year-old man has been remanded in custody after appearing in court over the murder of Natalie McNally in Northern Ireland. The 32-year-old was stabbed in her home in County Armagh in December. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Stephen McCullough was rearrested on Tuesday after being previously arrested on December the 19th. He appeared at Lisbon Magistrates Court earlier. The boss of British gas owner Centrica says he's horrified contractors for the company broke into struggling customers' homes to fit energy meters. His comments come shortly after energy regulator Ofgem announced it was launching an urgent investigation into British Gas. It follows a Times sting in which an undercover journalist accompanied debt collectors who reportedly entered the homes of vulnerable people to force-fit prepayment meters. Shell says its profits have increased by more than 53%, with earnings of more than £68 billion last year. It's the company's highest profit in its 115-year history. The energy giants benefited from soaring oil prices due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A Downing Street spokesman has said the Prime Minister absolutely understands people's anger over Shell's record profits at a time of soaring household energy bills. And that as around 2.3 million households missed an essential payment last month, including mortgages, rent and credit cards. According to Which's Consumer Insight Tracker, 59% of people had to either cut back on essentials, sell their property or dip into savings to cover spending. It's calling on essential businesses, including energy providers, to do more to help customers. And households in England and Wales will see their water bills rise by 7.5% from April. Industry body Water UK says customers will pay an average of £31 more than they did last year. The annual bill for an average household will hit £448. That's the biggest increase in almost 20 years. Landlords are being urged to act now to address damp and mould in social housing. It's after an investigation revealed tens of thousands of homes have problems. The industry regulator says between 1% and 2% of social homes have serious damp and mould. The research follows the death of 2-year-old Awab Ishak, who was exposed to mould in a housing association flat. And King Charles won't feature on Australia's new $5 banknote. The current image is a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, but the new design will pay tribute instead to the culture and history of Indigenous Australians. The country's central bank says it will take a number of years to design and print the new notes. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to you, Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So it was a high noon. The Bank of England raising interest rates for the 10th time in a row, taking the base rate up to 4%, up 0.5%. And that's, of course, going to have an impact on millions of homeowners across the UK. Indeed, Downing Street calling it difficult for mortgage borrowers. But the Bank of England's Governor, Andrew Bailey, saying that we are experiencing the first signs of inflation turning a corner, as he said. Well, he's just back from the Bank of England. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, here with On the Money. And it's an interesting assessment, of course, from the bank that, you know, victory, too early to declare victory, but turning the corner. It's an interesting phrase, isn't it?
It is an interesting phrase, and it will dominate headlines over the next few hours. For the Bank of England to say that is quite a big deal. There's also some fine print in their documentation suggesting that interest rates may have peaked even now at 4%.
Right.
Financial markets are now predicting 4.25% being the peak, as we've been discussing over recent weeks. We expect inflation to fall quickly this year, said the bank in documentation accompanying its interest rate decision at noon, as you say. But it notes inflation is still, quotes, well above the 2% target as measured by the Consumer Price Index. But here it is. Annual CPI inflation is expected to fall to around 4% towards the end of the year, says the bank, alongside a much shallower reported decline in output than in our November report forecast. And the bank says it will only raise rates further, Mark, quotes, if there were to be evidence of more persistent inflationary pressures than in its forecast.
Yeah, and one of the things that Andrew Bailey was touching on, he described it as wage setting, i.e. pay deals. And, of course, this feeds into the government
very much so.
Narrative. You know, we've got to keep a lid on the pay deals because of what it does to inflation. The bank actually backing that up.
Yeah, the government will seize on this notion that inflation is going to fall, quotes, quite quickly this year, says the Bank of England, because then that means they can say to union bosses and indeed to the public, look, we don't have to give double-digit pay rises because inflation is coming down. So maybe we can get away with giving public sector workers in particular slightly less chunky wage rises in the hope that the 4/5 of us who work in the private sector will get smaller wage increases as well to try and keep a lid on inflation. So quite strong rhetoric there from the Bank of England. And also, as we discussed, Mark, there's a sense that maybe the Bank of England was being too gloomy in its last quarterly report, which it gave in November, compared to February's one now. The bank previously predicted almost 2 years of economic contraction. It's now predicting about a year and a bit of economic contraction.
And not as deep.
I personally think they're being too gloomy. I think the Bank of England was very slow to understand that inflation was coming, and so they don't want to be seen to be behind the curve in understanding economic seriousness. But I think the bank needs to be careful here, because if they are too gloomy, what they say can have a real impact on economic outcomes, on investment decisions and on financial markets.
One of the things that they did identify, which is interesting in terms of the inflationary pressures, is what they call tightness in the labour market. And we've seen this. Unemployment is still very low. Lots of people out there that are employed. And an indication, of course, that may lead to higher pay deals to try and keep people happy and not leave.
Unemployment is low. Vacancies are there's still 1 million plus job vacancies out there. And the problem is that the UK is suffering from a particular issue which isn't so prominent, isn't nearly as prominent across continental Europe, if you like. Hundreds of thousands of people who are working, particularly people in their 40s and 50s, since lockdown, they haven't actually gone back to work. And these are often quite skilled people. They've decided to throw in the towel, retire early, have an extended career break. We know lockdown really was hard on a lot of people and changed a lot of people's attitude to life and the idea of working every day. So that is a real issue. That is pushing up wages, because employers have to fight harder to secure the services of particularly valued workers, and there are fewer of them. This isn't a Brexit thing. We've still got massive immigration into the UK, as high pretty much as ever it was under our European Union membership. It's that certain British workers or British-based workers have decided not to go back to work, and that is pushing up inflation. But, overall, this is pretty good news. Yes, it's a chunky 50 basis point rate rise, the second in a row. I do think it'll be the last one. I do think the next rate rise will be much smaller and will probably be the last.
Right, so a little bit of light amongst the gloom. Liam, as ever, thank you for that. Well, let's actually address the issue, of course, for those of you with mortgages and the housing market. Let's speak now to Mark Bogard, who's Chief Executive at the Family Building Society. Mark, thank you for your time. I mean, lots of people would be crunching the numbers at the moment, especially those, of course, who's seeing their fixed-rate deals coming to an end.
Yeah, so mortgage holders have got a really difficult decision still to take if their mortgage is coming to an end. They've got a choice between taking a variable rate or taking a fixed rate. And that depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, and whether you want to be certain of what your monthly budget is, or whether you can live with some uncertainty. But just to look at the figures this morning before this rate rise, you could get a variable mortgage at 3.2%, 2-year fixed at 4.64, 5 years at 4.17, and 10 years at 3.99. So, as Liam was saying, if rates start to come down at the end of next year, at the end of this year, which is the market is now predicting with 20% chance, then you might go variable and then take a fixed. But as I say, it depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. A really hard decision to take.
Yeah, and we're trying to make sense of what the bank is saying in its assessment, that perhaps we've turned the corner. And therefore, a lot of people may be thinking, well, things could get a bit easier as we head into spring. So what flexibility is there out there in the mortgage market for you to try and just get something to tide you over for the next 3 months before really deciding which way to fix?
Well, on the first point, you kicked off with Andrew Bailey's quote that it's too soon to declare victory against inflation. And it reminded me of that wonderful old Peter Cook sketch, where he said, we need a futile gesture at this stage. It'll raise the whole tone of the war. So our view would be that this rate rise wasn't necessary into a recession. You can get a variable rate with no early redemption charge, and that would allow you to do that for a period and then take a fixed rate. And we've certainly seen a number of customers doing that.
And part of the equation, if you like, is the number of products that are out there for people to look at. I mean, do you expect now that to become a bit more flexible once we've got this certainty as to what's going to happen in terms of the monetary policy for the year ahead?
Yeah, there's no shortage of mortgage products out there. Right. There are thousands of different mortgages, and swap rates, which is of forward expectations of interest rates have been quite stable since mid-November. So there are lots of pretty good mortgage deals against what rates are at the moment. But the decision as to how long to fix for and whether to go fixed or variable is tough. One thing people can do is speak to a mortgage broker whose job it is to help them depending on their own individual circumstances and what their appetite to risk is.
Yeah, because one size doesn't fit all, of course, and depends where you are in the country and what sort of property and so on. But anyway, a little bit of light, perhaps, for people as we face this year ahead. But Mark, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News. Thanks for your time. Now, let's bring you some breaking news that we're getting from Greater Manchester Police. And they're just saying that charges including attempted rape and assault against the Manchester United forward Mason Greenwood have been now discontinued, as they say, by the Crown Prosecution Service. So the Crown Prosecution Service taking that decision to discontinue, as they say, the aspect. We've got more coming through with a police statement saying criminal proceedings against a 21-year-old man in connection with an investigation opened in January 2022 have today been discontinued by the CPS. Chief Superintendent Michaela Kerr, the head of the Public Protection Unit, said, given the significant media coverage of this case, it is only fair that we share the news that the 21-year-old man who had been arrested and charged in connection with an investigation opened in January 2022 no longer faces criminal proceedings in relation to this. Went on to say in the statement, the investigation team has remained in regular contact with the legal team, providing any updates of note, and so understand the rationale for discontinuation of proceedings at this stage. This decision has not been taken lightly. The statement going on to say, despite the media and public interest in the case, we have decided not to comment on it in any further detail. I would, however, like to use this opportunity to reiterate GMP's commitment to investigating allegations of violence against women and girls and supporting those affected, regardless of their circumstances, throughout what can be a hard and upsetting time for them. The Greater Manchester Police statement going on to say an ever-increasing number of officers are receiving specialist training and the force is more consistently utilising tools available by the criminal justice system to keep people safe and care for victims. GMB, Greater Manchester Police, going on to say, if you feel you are or might be a victim, please don't let this case put you off asking for help. That coming through. So the attempted rape and assault charges against Manchester United forward Mason Greenwood discontinued by the Crown Prosecution Service. That's the legal standing of that. More, of course, coming through from that statement as it emerges. Well, let's return now to the issue of the interest rate rise at lunchtime today, and let's return to our London reporter Lisa Hartle about the impact that's having. And, of course, we've been assessing how businesses and estate agents across the board have been reacting to this a little earlier, Lisa.
Hello, yes. Well, as we know, people are already struggling to pay their mortgages and the rent's going up as well. And that's as a result of landlords having to pass on that cost of their mortgage onto the tenants. I've been at this estate agents in North London all morning, and since the news broke, they've had calls from landlords worried about whether if they can indeed put up the rent prices to cover their mortgage costs. So it just seems with this news breaking, everyone's just trying to figure out exactly what they can do, what they need to do. Will they be able to afford their mortgages? So I spoke to someone from a money advice trust to see what advice they could give to people who might be worrying at the moment.
So there's no getting away from the fact that it is a very difficult time for people financially. We're hearing from a lot of people who are struggling just to pay essential costs like food, energy, rent. So it's a really difficult time for people. The good news is that there is help out there for people. So if you're worrying about your mortgage or you're worried about paying other bills, then you can get in touch with a free debt advice charity like National Debt Line. We can talk you through your situation and what options you might have available.
So by the end of the year, the Bank of England estimates that 4 million homeowners in the UK with a mortgage will see payments go up from an average of £7 a month to an average of over £1,000 or over per month. So charities like this one that can give advice to people that might be worrying are invaluable at the moment.
Indeed so, and as we say, a lot of people are doing their number crunching at the moment, wanting help from whoever they can get it from. Lisa, thank you very much for updating us with the picture there in London. Still to come here on GB News Live, 100 days and counting. Rishi Sunak has been in office for that time, and a pretty rough ride so far. So what's ahead for him? We'll be assessing that. Let's take a short break first.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back. Now, a former British soldier who's convicted of the killing of an unarmed man in Northern Ireland has now been given a suspended jail sentence of 3 years. David Holden, who's now 52, was found guilty of the manslaughter of 23-year-old Aidan McNespy, who was shot in the back near a checkpoint in County Tyrone on his way to a sports event. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, is in Belfast for us. And Dougie, of course, despite the passage of time, this has been something hanging over this particular man. And I know the veterans movement say that they find the sentence extremely harsh. That's their view.
Well, they do, and that is because under the Good Friday Agreement, any ex-terrorist that has been convicted of any crime would only serve a maximum of 2 years. So they're saying this 3 years was extremely harsh to them, but it was a suspended sentence. And handing that down, Judge Justice O'Hara spoke of Holden's age. He was only 18 at the time. He pointed towards the training and the culpability of the British Army, because David Holden did admit firing the shot. He said his hands were wet, but when taking everything into account, Justice O'Hara then turned to the family's report, and he said it was harrowing that the mother used to walk to the place where Aidan was killed each and every night to say the rosary. Now, why is this particular case so important to Northern Ireland? Well, it comes on the back of that legacy going through the House of Lords at this moment in time, and that's really about ending these tribunals that are coming here to Northern Ireland. For as many times I have reported, Tony Blair gave out those letters of comfort. The first that anybody knew about them was in a case of the Hyde Park bombing that took place in 1988. And in that case, letters of comfort were brought forward by then what was suspected to be IRA activists. And that stops prosecution of those people unless absolute evidence is found, which meant then that really in Northern Ireland, 70% of the killings were carried out by those terrorists, Republican terrorists, 20% by loyalists and 10% by state forces. So what has really happened? Because state forces they were the only ones that actually kept records, they have been brought back to places like this time and time again. So the British government has said this is an awful lot of money being spent here for cases that cannot produce anything really at the end. And if families really want to know the truth, there has to be some sort of truth commission put in place. And if those that were involved in terrorism and the state forces engage with this truth commission, then there will be a basic amnesty for them. All of the political parties in Northern Ireland have disagreed with it, but the Veterans Association are, as much as they don't like the fact of an amnesty, they are also saying, well, what other way forward is there for them? So this may be the first and last conviction we will have seen of a British soldier and sentencing from that of 1998.
OK, and on this issue of legacy, we're now being told the UK government, to this statement by Chris Heaton-Harris, an independent inquiry launched into the Omer bombing, which, of course, Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan died in that bombing, has campaigned for many, many years.
Indeed, and that of course stays outside those legacy issues, because that was after the Good Friday Agreement, just months after. It was heartbreaking at the time. It was the worst atrocity ever to happen on the British Isles. 29 people dead, and in amongst it were of course a woman carrying twins, unborn twins. I remember the day very, very well, and I've said in the past, I welcomed my son into this world 2 days after that and had to question what sort of world we were actually coming into. That inquiry is going to go forward. The interesting thing about that is, though, the Republic of Ireland's Security Minister has said that he will watch on to find out what the British are actually doing. So they haven't committed to an inquiry, and of course that came from both sides of the border at that time. So I am delighted for Michael Gallagher, who has been campaigning for this for such a long time.
Indeed, and of course we'll await to see what that finds, as you say, with the number of deaths and more than 200 injured as well. Doogie, thank you very much for updating us in Belfast. Now, 100 days since Rishi Sunak given the keys to number 10 Downing Street. Second time lucky, of course, for the former Chancellor, managing to grab the top job after Liz Truss's resignation, after just, between 44 and 49 days in terms of leading the party and being in office as Prime Minister. But with the strikes, the cost of living crisis, the start to his premiership has been anything but plain sailing. Joining us now from Downing Street, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. And Tom, he had this attempt in January, of course, to put out a policy platform, the 5 things that he really wanted to look at. But since then, it's all been about personality and, as we described, sort of firefighting.
Yes, and that really has defined his premiership up until this point. It was a baptism of fire at the beginning there after the rollercoaster ride of the defenestration of Boris Johnson and the quick premiership of Liz Truss after just 49 days in office. So really, since the end of Boris Johnson, it's only been 149 days, which really doesn't seem like all that much in the grand context of it. And yet so much has happened in that space of time. Rishi Sunak really got the job promising MPs that he would be a firefighter, that he would stabilise things, and to be fair, to some extent, things have stabilised. We have seen some green shoots looking forward economically, but also to the Conservative Party's detriment, something else that seems to have stabilised is their poll ratings. This gulf between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, over 20 points on average. The Tories floating around the low 20s mark. A historically low number has not yet begun to climb up. And there's this mix of a sense of malaise with the strikes that are ongoing, and indeed this sense of personnel within the Conservative Party. 2 cabinet resignations, well, 1 resignation and 1 firing from the cabinet, 1 sacking, and maybe 1 more on the horizon as well, depending on the outcome of the Barb inquiry. Lots of fires around, but Rishi Sunak trying to cut through the noise there, as he announced just a couple of weeks ago with his 5 main pledges. Now, these are the sound bites that we're hearing time and time again from the Prime Minister on controlling inflation, on growing the economy, on cutting debt, on stopping the boats and on cutting those waiting lists. Those are the 5 main priorities that no doubt we will hear again and again in every answer that the Prime Minister gives to just about every question between now and the next general election, which could be up to almost 2 years away. And yet, to some extent, in the midst of this early days of this premiership, it feels like we are in a bit of an election campaign. The Labour Party riding high in the polls, the Prime Minister travelling around the country with his soapbox, doing these PM Connect events. To some extent, it feels like that election, although almost 2 years away, might be a little bit closer.
Well, that's the thought. Tom, as ever, thank you for updating us there in Downing Street. We'll see what this next 100 days brings, of course, and the prospects, as you say, of an early general election, perhaps. Thank you very much indeed for that. But coming up here on GB News Live, we've got the latest view from Lancashire and that continuing search for the missing dog walker, Nicola Bulley. We're being told we've had divers in the water in the river in this past few hours, updating on that. But let's get an update on the headlines now with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. It's coming up to 31 minutes past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. And we start with some breaking news. Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has had all charges against him dropped. The 21-year-old forward faced allegations of attempted rape, controlling and coercive behaviour, as well as assault. Greater Manchester Police said criminal proceedings have been discontinued by the Crown Prosecution Service. The Bank of England has raised its base rate from 3.5% to 4%. It's the 10th increase in a row. It's also predicted a recession of 5 consecutive quarters, with output not likely to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2026. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey said today's rise reflects the economic uncertainties.
With inflation currently above 10%, we are in uncharted territory. Energy prices may not fall by as much as currently expected in financial markets. And even if they do, this period of very high inflation could play into price and wage setting in the UK economy to a greater extent than we assume in our central projection. The tightness of the labour market reinforces this risk. Our decision to increase bank rate today, despite a weak outlook in our central projection, reflects these uncertainties.
An independent inquiry into the 1998 Omer bombing has been ordered by the Northern Ireland Secretary. Chris Heaton-Harris's announcement follows long-running legal action brought by Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan was killed in the real IRA bombing. The explosion in County Tyrone killed 29 people and injured hundreds more. A former soldier has been given a suspended sentence of 3 years for shooting a man in the back at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland 35 years ago. In November, David Holden was convicted of the manslaughter of 23-year-old Aidan McAnespie in 1988. Holden was the first veteran to be found guilty of an historical offence in Northern Ireland since the Good Friday Agreement. He was sentenced earlier to 3 years, but the judge suspended the full term. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with GB News Live. Now, the friends of Nicola Bulley, the mother who went missing while walking her dog in Lancashire, say they are holding on to hope, despite it now being nearly a week since she vanished. She was last seen walking her spaniel along part of the River Wyre in St Michael's on Wyre Friday morning. Soon after, the dog was found off its lead along with Nicola's phone, still connected to a work call. Both the police and the community have been mounting an extensive search operation, continuing today. Divers, indeed, in action in the river today. Our reporter Will Hollis has been following the story for us.
Nearly a week on from her disappearance, and there's still no answer as to what happened to Nicola Bulley. Yet her friends are holding on to hope that they can find her.
Knowing that her 2 little girls are at home missing mummy, and knowing that mummy is missing is what's driving us forward. We know that knowing Nikki, her family are everything. And we know without a doubt that if she could be at home with them, that's where she'd be. We are just trying to hold on to the hope.
The making sense doesn't make sense if you gather us. Again, Nikki is just a lovely human being inside and out, living a normal life, dropping the children off at school, going on a daily walk, things planned, going out the weekend, seeing friends and family. Yeah, you just can't make sense that this is actually happening and here we are.
Nicola vanished from St Michael's in Lancashire last Friday. She dropped her kids off at school, then walked her dog Willow, a spaniel, down a familiar route along the River Wyre at around 9:15. It's a popular place and usually busy. That was the last time she was seen. An hour later, her dog was found between the river and a bench. On the seat was her phone, still connected to a conference call. The sudden disappearance remains a mystery. Lancashire Police is keeping an open mind, but says it doesn't think she was attacked and isn't treating the case as criminal. The force and its partners are focusing on the river. The worry is that she's fallen in. Police divers and fire and rescue teams with sniffer dogs search below, while helicopters scan from the sky. Meanwhile, a man described as a key witness is speaking with officers. People living here in St Michael's are trying to make sense of what's happened to Nicola, but that's not all they're doing. They're also trying to help, and the local tennis club is being used as a base so that people can come down and offer their support. They've got maps of different walks along the River Wyre, and every day groups of people are walking those routes trying to find Nicola. Even with the community treading every inch of the river's edge, the puzzle is yet to be solved. At home, Nicola's partner and family are stuck wondering. Her 2 young girls just want their mummy back. Will Hollis, GB News.
Well, as Will reporting, incredibly difficult, of course, for the family and the local community. Let's speak now to the editor at the Lancashire Post, Nicola Adam, who's joined us. Nicola, thank you for your time. I gather there have been more underwater searches going on with divers today, and that will continue. But there's still, even though they're saying open-minded, still saying no indication of any criminal involvement.
Yes, they've been very clear on this right from the start, that they don't feel like she has been abducted or any of the other things that people naturally fear in a situation like this. They haven't given, if they've got something, they know a reason for that. They haven't given that away. They're holding that back. But certainly, talking to her family, they have not ruled anything out in their minds, I don't think. But it does look like they are back today. It's day 6 of the search today, and they are back on the riverbank and going through those motions again, which on the very first day they did have the divers down. They did have the drones up and the helicopter, etc. And now they seem to have gone back to that again. But it's a very big river, anything could have happened, I think.
And there's a tidal stretch, I think, isn't there, with the river then going out to the sea at Fleetwood?
That's right, yes. So, if she has fallen in and, that's a tragic situation if that's happened, then she could have been washed quite far down the river, sadly. But they are still checking that area where the dog was found wandering. And this afternoon, the lady who found the dog, who's been talking, she says that she recognised the dog and she called the police immediately. Then she found the phone as well. So the police were looped in extremely quickly in this situation. And it just, it's the whole of Lancashire is very tense right now. Nobody knows what's happened. And certainly the community in St Michael's and sort of the Garstang area and around where she was from are all joining in searches. It's very organised. They're all really keen to find her because she has these two little girls and obviously her partner at home, desperate for her to come home.
Yeah, I mean, your heart goes out to the family, particularly these two girls trying to make sense of it. I mean, how are you covering this story, bearing in mind the sensitivities involved?
Well, it's always a fine line with stories like this. We don't want to overstep our mark as local media, so we're trying. If we can help in any way, jog anybody's memory and make them think, well, actually, I saw this. That could, we're trying to we're keeping repeating the facts. We're keeping her right at the forefront of people's minds. So because it's more likely somebody from our patch who's a reader of our newspaper or our website, they're the people that will know something. And will have seen something. So we're just keeping up there. We're keeping her on the homepage. We're keeping her at the forefront of everybody's minds in this key period, just in case they've seen something that might solve this incident.
Yeah, and it certainly seems Lancashire Police have obviously been making use of that information that's come forward. We had that key witness who'd sort of passed through on the bank and seen what was going on. And I guess at this stage, any kind of sighting or evidence is going to be crucial.
Absolutely, and I'm sure they have their reasons for not looking at other scenarios apart from she's just gone missing. They obviously know something, but where is she? It seems very unlikely that she's just walked off and left her family in the middle of a conference call. It just sounds like a sort of very bizarre scenario if that's the case, and nobody's seen her. So there's a very good reason they're continuing to focus their efforts around that St Michael's Riverbank area.
Nicola from the Lancashire Post, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in GB News. Thanks for talking to us. And, of course, we'll keep you updated as we get more on that inquiry. Will Hollis there for us in Lancashire. Well, let's return to this question now of Australia, of its banknotes and King Charles's image not to feature on their new $5 banknote. That decision following consultation with the Australian government. The future design, we're told, to pay tribute to the culture and history of first Australians. The Queen's image, however, will continue to be on its coins until the Royal Australian Mint switches to the portrait of the King later this year, we're told. Well, joining us now is Royal Historian and broadcaster Rafe Hadel-Manku, who, of course, joins us here on the channel on many royal occasions. And, Rafe, of course, you've talked before about the importance of Commonwealth and the Queen's link to Australia in particular. And even though they've made this decision on the banknote, that will continue on the coinage.
It will continue on the coinage, but, make no mistake, this is a deliberate attempt to erase the visibility of the Australian monarchy. And it's actually part of a far wider attack on Australian history and culture and its proud British colonial heritage, if I can say, particularly by Australia's Labour government, which is, just as drenched in woke ideology as perhaps the Labour Party here is. And it comes alongside a recent decision by the government of Australia to appoint a Minister for the Republic, which is quite a nonsensical thing if you think about it. One of Her Majesty's Ministers of the Crown, a member of Her Majesty's Australian government, being a Minister for the Republic. And it's just a great shame, I think, that at this really critical moment for the monarchy in the Commonwealth, that you have in Canada and Australia and New Zealand such painfully woke governments. And there's such a contrast to 10 years ago, when you had in Canada and Australia and New Zealand extremely pro-monarchist prime ministers, John Key, New Zealand, Stephen Harper, and Tony Abbott. And so in Canada, we don't even know, or New Zealand, whether they will replace the Queen on their $20 notes with the King. And I just think it's a huge shame. But the arguments that they put forward, the Reserve Bank of Australia and the government say that they want more Aboriginal representation. Well, fine. There are already Aboriginals represented on 3 of the 5 denominations of notes. The back of the $5 note that we're talking about here displays the Australian Parliament. I'm sure many Australians, given their low-standing view of the Australian Parliament people, would much prefer to see that used for this. But uniquely, Australian notes have 2 faces on each note. So they have 10 faces on their notes, or 9 actually, because the 5 only has 1. No other country has so many people that could be depicted on notes. There's clearly enough space for the King to be represented if they wanted. No, there's a wider agenda at play here.
The conclusion is, of course, they can put what they want on their banknotes, and one suspects that maybe that King Charles would be fairly relaxed on this particular issue if, of course, it's linked to the indigenous history of the country. But that in itself, of course, is a very controversial matter for the Australians and how those first Australians or the indigenous population was actually treated.
You're right, and certainly huge wrongs were done to the Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples. But as I say, they are already represented on several of the Australian banknotes, and many more initiatives have taken place by the different governments to ensure that they are fully incorporated into the fabric of the Australian family. But, as I said, this is part of a larger project currently underway. It's part of the global decolonisation project, if I can put it that way. You'll be familiar with the 1619 project in the USA, which seeks to change America's founding date from July the 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, to the arrival of the first black slaves in 1619. And there's a similar debate now going on in Australia about changing the date of Australia Day, which marks when the British settlers first arrived. And, this whole attempt at trying to decolonize Australia is really just a reluctance to appreciate that it's thanks to Australia's British heritage that it's one of the world's richest, most successful, most stable countries. And if you want to go full decolonization, then why don't you get rid of democracy, get rid of the constitution, get rid of the economy, get rid of all the universities and education system and hospitals and medicine, all the things that make Australia, a great nation around the world, are due to its colonial inheritance. There are other ways in which you can incorporate Aboriginal culture into society without abolishing the monarchy.
Yeah, I perhaps would take issue as to whether just taking the image off a banknote is actually abolishing the monarchy as such. But clearly, we're going to get Commonwealth tours from the...
That's the commitment.
Yeah, sorry,
that's
Rafe,
the commitment of this Republican government, though. They are committed to abolishing the monarchy, and the first way you do that is by visibly erasing the bonds that tie the monarchy to the country, such as getting rid of them from the currency.
We should just reflect that there was a referendum in 1999 where they actually rejected that, and they've not had a referendum since. And certainly there is no indication that that will take place in any immediate future. But I'm just looking at what the Foreign Secretary described the relationship as. Of course, he met the Australian Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, in London, saying that Australia and UK were the best of mates.
Yes, well, this is very interesting, actually, because you've got this dichotomy here. You have, on the one side, strong forces within the government calling for Australia to be erased of its colonial heritage from Britain, and then that Britain has less relevance to Australia today than before. And yet now, actually, we're being told contradictorily by the Australian Foreign Minister, perhaps letting the cat slip out of the bag, I think, that Australia has never been more determined to forge closer links with Australia, with Britain, through AUKUS, this new important defence alliance in the region, but also with this new free trade deal on the way as well.
Yep. Well, we'll have to leave it there. But Rafe, thank you very much indeed for joining us once more. Nice to speak to you. But let's now talk about another sign of the times: the Jockey Club to scrap formal dress codes at the enclosures at all its courses to make horse racing more accessible and inclusive, is the quote. People being discouraged from dressing smartly if they want to, but the club saying racegoers can wear what makes them most comfortable and confident. However, fancy dress, offensive clothing or replica sport kits still not allowed, and formal wear remaining mandatory at the Queen's Stand at Epsom on Derby Day. Chief Executive Officer of the Jockey Club, Nevin Truesdale, joining us now. Oh, without a tie, Nevin. Well, there we are. There's the thing. I'm hoping you feel relaxed in doing that. But joking aside, of course, it is something that has exercised people, particularly when we see all the hats and so on at Ascot and the perhaps some of the outfits at Derby Day as well.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's actually been a barrier for some people, whether they come racing or not. Our research has told us that, in some people's minds, what to wear is a serious issue that they have to face into when they're asked to come racing. And I don't think there are any other sports that actually have that issue at all. When we looked at rugby, we looked at football, we looked at even at Wimbledon, there are no formal dress codes in many of those sports. And all we're really doing here is bringing ourselves into line with an evolution of society that says, if you want to dress up on a race day, absolutely do so. But please, do something that makes you feel comfortable, makes you feel confident, that makes you feel at your best. I mean, I should point out that Ascot is not one of our racecourses.
No, indeed. I mean, let's actually remind people. I think it's Cheltenham, Aintree, Newmarket, Epsom, Sandown are the Jockey Club tracks.
Yeah,
and of course
we run 15 racecourses in total, Mark, of which the ones you've just mentioned are all in our group. We've actually, in the case of Cheltenham, for example, we've actually not had a formal dress code in place at the festival for many, many years. And as I say, there's this misconception that we have had. So what we're saying here is, come and dress as you see fit. There are things to avoid, which you've mentioned in the preamble, which I think are important. But we want people to feel that it's a sport for all, and it really is. When you come racing and you see what's available, and you see that it's a fantastic day out, where you can probably get closer to the participants, to the horses, to the trainers, than pretty much any other sport or the equivalent in any other sport. It really is a fantastic atmosphere, and that's what we want people to enjoy.
So, are you trying to make it, I know it's a terrible phrase, more democratic as a result? Because, I know a lot of people do actually enjoy the sense of occasion, and we talk about Glorious Goodwood, which is not one of your courses. It is the whole social event and actually dressing up, and we've mentioned Ascot. Could you be taking that away from people a little?
No, I don't think we are at all, because we've been very clear in what we've said, that we want if people feel they want to dress up and feel they want to feel really at their best and really go out there and dress as they see fit, then they should do so. So I don't think we're taking anything away. I think what we're doing is we're giving people a clear choice and removing with society and with the way people behave in other walks of life as well.
Yeah.
But if people want to dress up, then I think many still will.
So where does this leave you, of course? Chief Executive, the top man, and one assumes that, you are expected to wear suit and tie or even the top hat and tails at some meetings?
Yeah, for me personally, I feel comfortable in a suit and tie on a race day. As far as I'm concerned, I'm at work, I'm representing racing, I'm representing the Jockey Club, and that's how I feel. That's how I feel comfortable, but that's individual choice.
OK, so obviously the fancy dress and I think the replica sports kit, definitely not on the agenda, though.
Fancy dress, I'll just point out, fancy dress has always been something that we've endorsed. It's just really if it's something that is deemed in any way derogatory or offensive, is something we would rule out. But this isn't actually changing our policy on fancy dress at all, because there's lots of people come to racing perfectly happily in fancy dress, and that will continue, I'm sure.
Despite some of the jockeys' colours, but that's a bit unfair, Baz. But Nevin, thank you very much indeed for your time, and we wish you well for the year ahead. Thank you very much indeed. You may have a view on that. Don't forget GB Views at gbnews.uk. And you have been indeed getting in touch with us, particularly on this day of the interest rate rise. Alistair first on that particular issue. The doom and gloom expressed by estate agents is overdone. Whilst house prices are falling, the likely overall reduction from here is going to be small. He says much to do with those that move to the country, moving back to cities. 5-year mortgage rates below where they were before Liz Truss became PM, and will fall further as the UK financial market continues to stabilise. That's his assessment. Bevel, meanwhile, when interest rates were falling, you were reporting how bad it was for savers like old people who had saved all their lives. Now it's terrible for millions of people who probably over-borrowed at low interest rates. Good point, actually, for savers. This is very good news, of course. And Parker with a plea for savers. Interest rates have been at 0% for 13 years, meaning that savers have made nothing, but mortgage holders have seen their assets rise. So for savers, this point I was making, it's about time interest rates were increased, double exclamation mark. And, of course, Audrey then coming in with the fact it's the 10th interest rate rise, people already struggling, unable to pay mortgages, bills. This is strangulation, another double exclamation mark. Then Dave from Birmingham, we've seen it all before. He says, as in 1980, the house price boom caused by reckless and irresponsible lending by the banks and building societies. Back then it was 90, 95, even 100% mortgages. Today the experts thinking artificially low bank rates will continue indefinitely. And Eric reflecting, my mortgage rate went from 160 to £500 per month. I will probably have to sell now. Well, the news is, of course, from all those experts we've been speaking to, Eric, try and hold on, because it may well be, according to the Bank of England, that we've turned the corner and that inflation may be on the way down, and therefore interest rates certainly perhaps may not see any further increases from 4% onwards, or we could well be seeing some cuts in interest rates later in the year. So we'll keep you updated on that with Liam as ever, but it is at 4% at the moment, after 0.5%. More reaction to come. Patrick with you for this afternoon, but Andrew Pearce is with you tomorrow from 12 to 2, and he'll take you through all the issues of the day. But for the moment, thanks for being with us. We'll update you now on the weather for the rest of the day.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Fairly cloudy out there. It is pretty mild, though. Temperatures in double figures for most. And there is some rain across northern Scotland from these weather fronts. High pressure is the dominant feature, but it is to the south, and we've got westerly winds, which are bringing some light rain and drizzle to parts of northwest England, the hills and mountains of West Wales as well. But the heaviest rain is certainly across northern Scotland. Quite gusty in places, but not as windy as yesterday for most, although the winds will pick up through this evening over northeast England and eastern Scotland. Most places pretty grey, but some breaks in the cloud, a hint of sunshine across parts of the east. And we will see those temperatures, as I said, double figures for most. We could get up to 13 Celsius in one or two spots. That rain will continue for a time this evening, but ease off across the Highlands and the Western Isles before midnight. That rain then pushes southwards as a kind of a weak band, just turning a bit damp for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland through the early hours. Elsewhere, again, most places dry. It will turn a little colder across northern parts with some showers in Shetland and Orkney. Further south, a very mild start to Friday. And a similar day on Friday, actually. In the west, a lot of clouds and drizzle over the hills of Wales, a bit damp for northwest England to start with. We will see outbreaks of rain across western parts of Scotland. But brighter skies developing, perhaps across parts of East Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Most places just dry and cloudy. And again, temperatures getting up into the teens in one or two locations and widely up to double figures. Won't be as windy on Friday either. As we go through the evening, we'll see that rain just heading its way across the Northern Isles. Still some drizzle over western hills, but most places looking dry. And many places will be dry into Saturday too. Certainly for England and Wales, we will see some rain for a time crossing Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most places turning brighter on Sunday with some sunny spells, but also a little colder.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 3 p.m, which means